Begin by simply listening. Slow down. See just how peaceful today can be. Greetings, children. It is I, your obedient servant, Sebastian St. Smalls. The plan for this one is Tunic, and I have some backup games planned, and an unpronounceable book, but it'll be great. You just read in the title or whatever. Did I say I am your host, your obedient servant, Sebastian St. Smalls? Did I already say that? And, okay, here we go. I'm going to get this started. So slow down, see just how peaceful today can be. Thanks so much for swinging by. Wish us luck. In the farming game, you mean? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hooray. Yeah, we're off to a good start here. Wait a minute, why can't they see it?
Title page and preface of Meister Eckhart's sermons, translated by Claude Field. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
Okay, I'm starting the book. Then I'll figure out this game problem I'm having.
Introduction. Whilst engaged on the translations contained in these volumes, and on the notes appended to the various tales, I have found myself led unavoidably into a much more extensive course of reading than I had originally contemplated, and one which in great measure bears directly upon the earlier medieval romance. Before commencing these labors, I was aware, generally, that there existed a connection between the Welsh Mabinogion and the romance of the continent, but as I advanced, I became better acquainted with the closeness and extent of that connection, its history, and the proofs by which it is supported. At the same time, indeed, I became aware, and still strongly feel, that it is one thing to collect facts, and quite another to classify and draw from them their legitimate conclusions, and though I am loath that what has been collected with some pains, should be entirely thrown away, it is unwillingly, and with diffidence, that I trespass beyond the acknowledged province of a translator. In the 12th and 13th centuries there arose into general notoriety in Europe, a body of romance which in various forms retained its popularity till the Reformation. In it the plot, the incidents, the characters, were almost wholly those of chivalry, that bond which united the warriors of France, Spain, and Italy, with those of pure Teutonic descent, and embraced more or less firmly all the nations of Europe, excepting only the Slavonic races, not yet risen to power, and the Celts, who had fallen from it. It is not difficult to account for this latter omission. The Celts, driven from the plains into the mountains and islands, preserved their liberty, and hated their oppressors with fierce, and not causeless, hatred. A proud and free people, isolated both in country and language, were not likely to adopt customs which implied brotherhood with their foes. Such being the case, it is remarkable that when the chief romances are examined, the name of many of the heroes and their scenes of action are found to be Celtic, and those of persons and places famous in the traditions of Wales and Brittany. Of this the romances of Owain and Gawain, Sir Perceval de Gauls, Eric and Enid, Mort d'Arthur, Sir Lancelot, Sir Tristan, the Grail, and C. may be cited as examples. In some cases a tendency to triads, and other matters of internal evidence, point in the same direction. It may seem difficult to account for this. Although the ancient dominion of the Celts over Europe is not without enduring evidence in the names of the mountains and streams, the great features of the country, yet the loss of their prior language by the great mass of the Celtic nations in southern Europe, if indeed their successors in territory be at all of their blood, prevents us from clearly seeing, and makes us wonder, how stories, originally embodied in the Celtic dialects of Great Britain and France, could so influence the literature of nations to whom the Celtic languages were utterly unknown. Whence then came these internal marks, and these proper names of persons and places, the features of a story usually of earliest date and least likely to change? These romances were found in England, France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, and even Iceland, as early as the beginning of the 13th and end of the 12th century. The Germans, who propagated them through the nations of the north, derived them certainly from France. Robert Wace published his Anglo-Norman romance of the Brut d'Angleterre about 1155. Sir Tristan was written in French prose in 1170, and the Chevalier Orléans, Chevalier de l'Épée, and Sir Lancelot du Lac, in metrical French, by Christian de Troyes, before 1200. From these facts it is to be argued that the further back these romances are traced, the more clearly does it appear that they spread over the continent from the northwest of France. The older versions, it may be remarked, are far more simple than the later corruptions. In them there is less allusion to the habits and usages of chivalry, and the Welsh names and elements stand out in stronger relief. It is a great step to be able to trace the stocks of these romances back to Wace, or to his country and age. For Wace's work was not original. He himself, a native of Jersey, appears to have derived much of it from the Historia Brittonum of Gruffydd ab Arthur, commonly known as Geoffrey of Monmouth, born 1128, who himself professes to have translated from a British original. It is, however, very possible that Wace may have had access, like Geoffrey, to independent sources of information. To the claims set up on behalf of Wace and Geoffrey, to be regarded as the channels by which the Cymric tales passed into the continental romance, may be added those of a third or most contemporary author. Liaman, a Saxon priest, dwelling, about 1200, upon the banks of the Upper Severn, acknowledges for the source of his British history, the English Bede, the Latin Albine, and the French Wace. The last named, however, is by very much his chief, and, for Welsh matters, his only avowed authority. His book, nevertheless, contains a number of names and stories relating to Wales, of which no traces appear in Wace, or indeed in Geoffrey, but which he was certainly in a very favourable position to obtain for himself. Liaman, therefore, not only confirms Geoffrey in some points, but it is clear that, professing to follow Wace, he had independent access to the great body of Welsh literature then current. Sir F. Madden has put this matter very clearly, in his recent edition of Liaman. The Abbé de la Rue, also, was of opinion that Gaimar, an Anglo-Norman, in the reign of Stephen, usually regarded as a translator of Geoffrey of Monmouth, had access to a Welsh independent authority. In addition to these, is to be mentioned the English version of Sir Tristram, which Sir Walter Scott considered to be derived from a distinct Celtic source, and not, like the later Amadis, Palmerin, and Lord Berners' canon of romance, imported into English literature by translation from the French. For the Entours of Arthur, recently published by the Camden Society, their editor, Mr. Robson, seems to hint at a similar claim. Here then are various known channels, by which portions of Welsh and Armoric fiction crossed the Celtic border, and gave rise to the more ornate, and widely spread romance of the age of chivalry. It is not improbable that there may have existed many others. It appears then that a large portion of the stocks of medieval romance proceeded from Wales. We have next to see in what condition they are still found in that country. That Wales possessed an ancient literature, containing various lyric compositions, and certain triads, in which are arranged historical facts or moral aphorisms, has been shown by Sharon Turner, who has established the high antiquity of many of these compositions. The more strictly romantic literature of Wales has been less fortunate, though not less deserving of critical attention. Small portions only of it have hitherto appeared in print, the remainder being still hidden in the obscurity of ancient manuscripts. Of these the chief is supposed to be the Red Book of Hergest, now in the library of Jesus College, Oxford, and of the 14th century. This contains, besides poems, the prose romances known as Mabinogion. The Black Book of Sarah Marthan, preserved at Hengert, and considered not to be of later date than the 12th century, is said to contain poems only. 1. The Mabinogion, however, though thus early recorded in the Welsh tongue, are in their existing form by no means wholly Welsh. They are of two tolerably distinct classes. Of these, the older contains few allusions to Norman customs, manners, arts, arms, and luxuries. The other, and less ancient, are full of such allusions, and of ecclesiastical terms. Both classes, no doubt, are equally of Welsh root, but the former are not more overlaid or corrupted, than might have been expected, from the communication that so early took place between the Normans and the Welsh, whereas the latter probably migrated from Wales, and were brought back and retranslated after an absence of centuries, with a load of Norman additions. Hilch and Olwen, and the Dream of Rhonabwy, may be cited as examples of the older and purer class, the Lady of the Fountain, Pajor, and Geraint ab Urban, of the later, or decorated. Besides these, indeed, there are a few tales, as Ymlyn and Ymig, Sir Bevis of Hamtown, the Seven Wise Masters, and the story of Charlemagne, so obviously of foreign extraction, and of late introduction into Wales, not presenting even a Welsh name, or allusion, and of such very slender intrinsic merit, that although comprised in the LLYV Cock, they have not a shadow of claim to form part of the canon of Welsh romance. Therefore, although I have translated and examined them, I have given them no place in these volumes. There is one argument in favour of the high antiquity in Wales of many of the Mabinogion, which deserves to be mentioned here. This argument is founded on the topography of the country. It is found that Saxon names of places are very frequently definitions of the nature of the locality to which they are attached, as Clifton, Deepden, Bridgeford, Thorpe, Ham, Wick, and the like, whereas those of Wales are more frequently commemorative of some event, real or supposed, said to have happened on or near the spot, or bearing allusion to some person renowned in the story of the country or district. Such are Llyn Morwinion the Lake of the Maidens, Rhydy Bed the Ford of the Grave, Bryn Syfyrgau the Hill of Assault, and so on. But as these names could not have preceded the events to which they refer, the events themselves must be not unfrequently as old as the early settlement in the country. And as some of these events and fictions are the subjects of, and are explained by, existing Welsh legends, it follows that the legends must be, in some shape or other, of very remote antiquity. It will be observed that this argument supports remote antiquity only for such legends as are connected with the greater topographical features, as mountains, lakes, rivers, seas, which must have been named at an early period in the inhabitation of the country by man. But there exist, also, legends connected with the lesser features, as pools, hills, detached rocks, caves, fords, and the like, places not necessarily named by the earlier settlers, but the names of which are, nevertheless, probably very old, since the words of which they are composed are in many cases not retained in the colloquial tongue, in which they must once have been included, and are in some instances lost from the language altogether, so much so as to be only partially explicable even by scholars. The argument applies likewise, in their degree, to camps, barrows, and other artificial earthworks. Conclusions thus drawn, when established, rest upon a very firm basis. They depend upon the number and appositeness of the facts, and it would be very interesting to pursue this branch of evidence in detail. In following up this idea, the names to be sought for might thus be classed. I names of the great features, involving proper names and actions. Cadair Idris and Cadair Arthur both involve more than a mere name. Idris and Arthur must have been invested with heroic qualifications to have been placed in such seats. Two names of lesser features, as Bryn Wyseath Hill of the Dart, Llyn Llyngclys Lake of the Engulfed Court, Severn Bed the Ridge of the Grave, Rhydy Season the Saxon's Ford. Three names of mixed natural and artificial objects, as Coetan Arthur Arthur's Coet, Cerrig Wydrudian the Crag of the Heroes, which involve actions. And such as embody proper names only, as Cerrig Howell the Crag of Howell, Caer Orion Rod the Camp of Orion Rod, Bryn Goronwy the Breast, of the Hill, of Goronwy, Castell Mab Winion the Castle of the Son of Winion, Nant Gurthern the Rill of Vortigern. The selection of names would demand much care and discretion. The translations should be indisputable, and, where known, the connection of a name with a legend should be noted. Such a name as Mockdrev Swinetown would be valueless unless accompanied by a legend. It is always valuable to find a place or work called after an individual, because it may help to support some tradition of his existence or his actions. But it is requisite that care be taken not to push the etymological dissection too far. Thus, Caer Orion Rod should be taken simply as the Camp of Orion Rod and not rendered the Camp of the Silver Circle, because the latter, though it might possibly have something to do with the reason for which the name was borne by Orion Rod herself, had clearly no reference to its application to her camp. It appears to me, then, looking back upon what has been advanced, That we have throughout Europe, at an early period, a great body of literature, known as medieval romance, which, amidst much that is wholly of Teutonic origin and character, includes certain well-marked traces of an older Celtic nucleus. Proceeding backwards in time, we find these romances, their ornaments falling away at each step, existing towards the 12th century, of simpler structure, and with less encumbered Celtic features, in the works of Wace, and other bards of the Langue d'Oil. 3. We find that Geoffrey of Monmouth, Lyman, and other early British and Anglo-Saxon historians, and minstrels, on the one hand, transmitted to Europe the rudiments of its after-romance, much of which, on the other hand, they drew from Wales. 4. Crossing into Wales we find, in the Mabinogion, the evident counterpart of the Celtic portion of the continental romance, mixed up, indeed, with various reflex additions from beyond the border, but still containing ample internal evidence of a Welsh original. Looking at the connection between divers of the more ancient Mabinogion, and the topographical nomenclature of part of the country, we find evidence of the great, though indefinite, antiquity of these tales, and of an origin, which, if not indigenous, is certainly derived from no European nation. It was with a general belief in some of these conclusions, that I commenced my labors, and I end them with my impressions strongly confirmed. The subject is one not unworthy of the talents of a LLWYD or a Prycard. It might, I think, be shown, by pursuing the inquiry, that the Cymric nation is not only, as Dr. Prycard has proved it to be, an early offshoot of the Indo-European family, and a people of unmixed descent, but that when driven out of their conquests by the later nations, the names and exploits of their heroes, and the compositions of their bards, spread far and wide among the invaders, and affected intimately their tastes and literature for many centuries, and that it has strong claims to be considered the cradle of European romance. C.E.G. Dowlais, the 29th of August, 1848. The Lady of the Fountain. King Arthur was at Cerulean upon Usk, and one day he sat in his chamber, and with him were Owain the son of Urien, and Kynan the son of Clydno, and Kai the son of Kyna, and Gwenhwyvar and her handmaidens at needlework by the window. And if it should be said that there was a porter at Arthur's palace, there was none. Blue-White Gaivivor was there, acting as porter, to welcome guests and strangers, and to receive them with honor, and to inform them of the manners and customs of the court, and to direct those who came to the hall or to the presence chamber, and those who came to take up their lodging. In the center of the chamber King Arthur sat upon a seat of green rushes, over which was spread a covering of flame-colored satin, and a cushion of red satin was under his elbow. Then Arthur spoke. "If I thought you would not disparage me," said he, "I would sleep while I wait for my repast, and you can entertain one another with relating tales, and can obtain a flagon of mead and some meat from Kai." And the king went to sleep. And Kynan the son of Clydno asked Kai for that which Arthur had promised them. "I, too, will have the good tale which he promised to me," said Kai. "Nay," answered Kynan, "fairer will it be for thee to fulfill Arthur's behest, in the first place, and then we will tell thee the best tale that we know." So Kai went to the kitchen and to the mead cellar, and returned bearing a flagon of mead and a golden goblet, and a handful of skewers, upon which were broiled collops of meat. Then they ate the collops and began to drink the mead. "Now," said Kai, "it is time for you to give me my story." Kynan said, "Owain, do thou pay to Kai the tale that is his due." "Truly," said Kynan, "thou art older, and art a better teller of tales, and hast seen more marvelous things than I. Do thou therefore pay Kai his tale." "Begin thyself," quoth Owain, "with the best that thou knowest." "I will do so," answered Kynan. "I was the only son of my mother and father, and I was exceedingly aspiring, and my daring was very great. I thought there was no enterprise in the world too mighty for me, and after I had achieved all the adventures that were in my own country, I equipped myself, and set forth to journey through deserts and distant regions. And at length it chanced that I came to the fairest valley in the world, wherein were trees of equal growth, and a river ran through the valley, and a path was by the side of the river. And I followed the path until midday, and continued my journey along the remainder of the valley until the evening, and at the extremity of a plain I came to a large and lustrous castle, at the foot of which was a torrent. And I approached the castle, and there I beheld two youths with yellow curling hair, each with a frontlet of gold upon his head, and clad in a garment of yellow satin, and they had gold clasps upon their insteps. In the hand of each of them was an ivory bow, strung with the sinews of the stag, and their arrows had shafts of the bone of the whale, and were winged with peacock's feathers. The shafts also had golden heads. And they had daggers with blades of gold, and with hilts of the bone of the whale. And they were shooting their daggers. And a little way from them I saw a man in the prime of life, with his beard newly shorn, clad in a robe and a mantle of yellow satin, and round the top of his mantle was a band of gold lace. On his feet were shoes of variegated leather, fastened by 2 bosses of gold. When I saw him, I went towards him and saluted him, and such was his courtesy that he no sooner received my greeting than he returned it. And he went with me towards the castle. Now there were no dwellers in the castle except those who were in one hall. And there I saw 24 damsels, embroidering satin at a window. And this I tell thee, Kai, that the least fair of them was fairer than the fairest maid thou hast ever beheld in the island of Britain, and the least lovely of them was more lovely than Gwenhwyvar, the wife of Arthur, when she has appeared loveliest at the offering, on the day of the Nativity, or at the feast of Easter. They rose up at my coming, and 6 of them took my horse, and divested me of my armor, and 6 others took my arms, and washed them in a vessel until they were perfectly bright. And the third 6 spread cloths upon the tables and prepared meat. And the fourth 6 took off my soiled garments, and placed others upon me, namely, an undervest and a doublet of fine linen, and a robe, and a surcoat, and a mantle of yellow satin with a broad gold band upon the mantle. And they placed cushions both beneath and around me, with coverings of red linen, and I sat down. Now the 6 maidens who had taken my horse, unharnessed him, as well as if they had been the best squires in the island of Britain. Then, behold, they brought bowls of silver wherein was water to wash, and towels of linen, some green and some white, and I washed. And in a little while the man sat down to the table. And I sat next to him, and below me sat all the maidens, except those who waited on us. And the table was of silver, and the cloths upon the table were of linen, and no vessel was served upon the table that was not either of gold or of silver, or of buffalo horn. And our meat was brought to us. And verily, I saw there every sort of meat and every sort of liquor that I have ever seen elsewhere, but the meat and the liquor were better served there than I have ever seen them in any other place. Until the repast was half over, neither the man nor any one of the damsels spoke a single word to me, but when the man perceived that it would be more agreeable to me to converse than to eat any more, he began to inquire of me who I was. I said I was glad to find that there was someone who would discourse with me, and that it was not considered so great a crime at that court for people to hold converse together. Chieftain, said the man, we would have talked to thee sooner, but we feared to disturb thee during thy repast. Now, however, we will discourse. Then I told the man who I was, and what was the cause of my journey, and said that I was seeking whether anyone was superior to me, or whether I could gain the mastery over all. The man looked upon me, and he smiled and said, if I did not fear to distress thee too much, I would show thee that which thou seekest. Upon this I became anxious and sorrowful, and when the man perceived it, he said, if thou wouldest rather that I should show thee thy disadvantage than thine advantage, I will do so. Sleep here tonight, and in the morning arise early, and take the road upwards through the valley until thou reachest the wood through which thou camest hither. A little way within the wood thou wilt meet with a road branching off to the right, by which thou must proceed, until thou comest to a large sheltered glade with a mound in the center. And thou wilt see a black man of great stature on the top of the mound. He is not smaller in size than 2 of the men of this world. He has but 1 foot, and 1 eye in the middle of his forehead. And he has a club of iron, and it is certain that there are no 2 men in the world who would not find their burden in that club. And he is not a comely man, but on the contrary he is exceedingly ill-favored, and he is the woodward of that wood. And thou wilt see 1,000 wild animals grazing around him. Inquire of him the way out of the glade, and he will reply to thee briefly, and will point out the road by which thou shalt find that which thou art in quest of. And long seemed that night to me. And the next morning I arose and equipped myself, and mounted my horse, and proceeded straight through the valley to the wood, and I followed the crossroad which the man had pointed out to me, till at length I arrived at the glade. And there was I 3 times more astonished at the number of wild animals that I beheld, than the man had said I should be. And the black man was there, sitting upon the top of the mound. Huge of stature as the man had told me that he was, I found him to exceed by far the description he had given me of him. As for the iron club which the man had told me was a burden for 2 men, I am certain, Kai, that it would be a heavy weight for 4 warriors to lift, and this was in the black man's hand. And he only spoke to me in answer to my questions. Then I asked him what power he held over those animals. I will show thee, little man, said he. And he took his club in his hand, and with it he struck a stag a great blow so that he brayed vehemently, and at his braying the animals came together, as numerous as the stars in the sky, so that it was difficult for me to find room in the glade to stand among them. There were serpents, and dragons, and divers sorts of animals. And he looked at them, and bade them go and feed, and they bowed their heads, and did him homage as vassals to their lord. Then the black man said to me, seest thou now, little man, what power I hold over these animals? Then I inquired of him the way, and he became very rough in his manner to me. However, he asked me whither I would go. And when I told him who I was and what I sought, he directed me. Take, said he, that path that leads towards the head of the glade, and ascend the wooded steep until thou comest to its summit, and there thou wilt find an open space like to a large valley, and in the midst of it a tall tree, whose branches are greener than the greenest pine trees. Under this tree is a fountain, and by the side of the fountain a marble slab, and on the marble slab a silver bowl, attached by a chain of silver, so that it may not be carried away. Take the bowl and throw a bowlful of water upon the slab, and thou wilt hear a mighty peal of thunder, so that thou wilt think that heaven and earth are trembling with its fury. With the thunder there will come a shower so severe that it will be scarce possible for thee to endure it and live. And the shower will be of hailstones, and after the shower, the weather will become fair, but every leaf that was upon the tree will have been carried away by the shower. Then a flight of birds will come and alight upon the tree, and in thine own country thou didst never hear a strain so sweet as that which they will sing. And at the moment thou art most delighted with the song of the birds, thou wilt hear a murmuring and complaining coming towards thee along the valley. And thou wilt see a knight upon a coal-black horse, clothed in black velvet, and with a pennon of black linen upon his lance, and he will ride unto thee to encounter thee with the utmost speed. If thou fleest from him he will overtake thee, and if thou abidest there, as sure as thou art a mounted knight, he will leave thee on foot. And if thou dost not find trouble in that adventure, thou needest not seek it during the rest of thy life. So I journeyed on, until I reached the summit of the steep, and there I found everything as the black man had described it to me. And I went up to the tree, and beneath it I saw the fountain, and by its side the marble slab, and the silver bowl fastened by the chain. Then I took the bowl, and cast a bowlful of water upon the slab, and thereupon, behold, the thunder came, much more violent than the black man had led me to expect, and after the thunder came the shower, and of a truth I tell thee, Kai, that there is neither man nor beast that can endure that shower and live. For not one of those hailstones would be stopped, either by the flesh or by the skin, until it had reached the bone. I turned my horse's flank towards the shower, and placed the beak of my shield over his head and neck, while I held the upper part of it over my own head. And thus I withstood the shower. When I looked on the tree there was not a single leaf upon it, and then the sky became clear, and with that, behold the birds lighted upon the tree, and sang. And truly, Kai, I never heard any melody equal to that, either before or since. And when I was most charmed with listening to the birds, lo, a murmuring voice was heard through the valley, approaching me and saying, O knight, what has brought thee hither? What evil have I done to thee, that thou shouldst act towards me and my possessions as thou hast this day? Dost thou not know that the shower today has left in my dominions neither man nor beast alive that was exposed to it? And thereupon, behold, a knight on a black horse appeared, clothed in jet black velvet, and with a tabard of black linen about him. And we charged each other, and, as the onset was furious, it was not long before I was overthrown. Then the knight passed the shaft of his lance through the bridle rein of my horse, and rode off with the 2 horses, leaving me where I was. And he did not even bestow so much notice upon me as to imprison me, nor did he despoil me of my arms. So I returned along the road by which I had come. And when I reached the glade where the black man was, I confess to thee, Kai, it is a marvel that I did not melt down into a liquid pool, through the shame that I felt at the black man's derision. And that night I came to the same castle where I had spent the night preceding. And I was more agreeably entertained that night than I had been the night before, and I was better feasted, and I conversed freely with the inmates of the castle, did not melt down into my expedition to the fountain that I felt did I mention it to any, and I remained there that night. When I arose on the morrow, I found it already saddled into my expedition to the fountain that read as follows, and after putting on my armor and leaving there my blessing, I returned to my own court. And that horse I still possess, and he is in the stable yonder. And I declare that I would not part with him for the best palfrey in the island of Britain. Now of a truth, Kai, no man ever before confessed to an adventure so much to his own discredit, and verily it seems strange to me, that neither before nor since have I heard of any person besides myself who knew of this adventure, and that the subject of it should exist within King Arthur's dominions, without any other person lighting upon it. Now quoth Owain, would it not be well to go and endeavor to discover that place? By the hand of my friend said Kai, often dost thou utter that with thy tongue which thou wouldst not make good with thy deeds. In very truth said Gwenhwyvar, it were better thou wert hanged, Kai, than to use such uncourteous speech towards a man like Owain. By the hand of my friend, good lady said Kai, thy praise of Owain is not greater than mine. With that Arthur awoke, and asked if he had not been sleeping a little. Yes, Lord, answered Owain, thou hast slept a while. Is it time for us to go to meat? It is, Lord, said Owain. Then the horn for washing was sounded, and the king and all his household sat down to eat. And when the meal was ended, Owain withdrew to his lodging, and made ready his horse and his arms. On the morrow, with the dawn of day, he put on his armor, and mounted his charger, and travelled through distant lands and over desert mountains. And at length he arrived at the valley which Kynan had described to him, and he was certain that it was the same that he sought. And journeying along the valley by the side of the river, he followed its course till he came to the plain and within sight of the castle. When he approached the castle, he saw the youths shooting their daggers in the place where Kynan had seen them, and the yellow man, to whom the castle belonged, standing hard by. And no sooner had Owain saluted the yellow man than he was saluted by him in return. And he went forward towards the castle, and there he saw the chamber, and when he had entered the chamber he beheld the maidens working at satin embroidery, in chairs of gold. And their beauty and their comeliness seemed to Owain far greater than Kynan had represented to him. And they rose to wait upon Owain, as they had done to Kynan, and the meal which they set before him gave more satisfaction to Owain than it had done to Kynan. About the middle of the repast, the yellow man asked Owain the object of his journey. And Owain made it known to him, and said, I am in quest of the knight who guards the fountain. Upon this the yellow man smiled, and said that he was as loath to point out that adventure to Owain as he had been to Kynan. However, he described the whole to Owain, and they retired to rest. The next morning Owain found his horse made ready for him by the damsels, and he set forward and came to the glade where the black man was. And the stature of the black man seemed more wonderful to Owain than it had done to Kynan, and Owain asked of him his road, and he showed it to him. And Owain followed the road, as Kynan had done, till he came to the green tree, and he beheld the fountain, and the slab beside the fountain, with the bowl upon it. And Owain took the bowl, and threw a bowlful of water upon the slab. And, lo, the thunder was heard, and after the thunder came the shower, much more violent than Kynan had described, and after the shower the sky became bright. And when Owain looked at the tree, there was not one leaf upon it. And immediately the birds came, and settled upon the tree, and sang. And when their song was most pleasing to Owain, he beheld a knight coming towards him through the valley, and he prepared to receive him, and encountered him violently. Having broken both their lances, they drew their swords, and fought blade to blade. Then Owain struck the knight a blow through his helmet, headpiece and visor, and through the skin, and the flesh, and the bone, until it wounded the very brain. Then the Black Knight felt that he had received a mortal wound, upon which he turned his horse's head, and fled. And Owain pursued him, and followed close upon him, although he was not near enough to strike him with his sword. Thereupon Owain descried a vast and resplendent castle. And they came to the castle gate. And the Black Knight was allowed to enter, and the portcullis was let fall upon Owain, and it struck his horse behind the saddle, and cut him in two, and carried away the rowels of the spurs that were upon Owain's heels. And the portcullis descended to the floor. And the rowels of the spurs and part of the horse were without, and Owain with the other part of the horse remained between the two gates, and the inner gate was closed, so that Owain could not go thence, and Owain was in a perplexing situation. And while he was in this state, he could see through an aperture in the gate, a street facing him, with a row of houses on each side. And he beheld a maiden, with yellow curling hair, and a frontlet of gold upon her head, and she was clad in a dress of yellow satin, and on her feet were shoes of variegated leather. And she approached the gate, and desired that it should be opened. Heaven knows, lady, said Owain, it is no more possible for me to open to thee from hence, than it is for thee to set me free. Truly, said the damsel, it is very sad that thou canst not be released, and every woman ought to succor thee, for I never saw one more faithful in the service of ladies than thou. As a friend thou art the most sincere, and as a lover the most devoted. Therefore, quoth she, whatever is in my power to do for thy release, I will do it. Take this ring and put it on thy finger, with the stone inside thy hand, and close thy hand upon the stone. And as long as thou concealest it, it will conceal thee. When they have consulted together, they will come forth to fetch thee, in order to put thee to death, and they will be much grieved that they cannot find thee. And I will await thee on the horse block yonder, and thou wilt be able to see me, though I cannot see thee, therefore come and place thy hand upon my shoulder, that I may know that thou art near me. And by the way that I go hence, do thou accompany me. Then she went away from Owain, and he did all that the maiden had told him. And the people of the castle came to seek Owain, to put him to death, and when they found nothing but the half of his horse, they were sorely grieved. And Owain vanished from among them, and went to the maiden, and placed his hand upon her shoulder, whereupon she set off, and Owain followed her, until they came to the door of a large and beautiful chamber, and the maiden opened it, and they went in, and closed the door. And Owain looked around the chamber, and behold, there was not even a single nail in it that was not painted with gorgeous colors, and there was not a single panel that had not sundry images in gold portrayed upon it. The maiden kindled a fire, and took water in a silver bowl, and put a towel of white linen on her shoulder, and gave Owain water to wash. Then she placed before him a silver table, inlaid with gold, upon which was a cloth of yellow linen, and she brought him food. And of a truth, Owain had never seen any kind of meat that was not there in abundance, but it was better cooked there than he had ever found it in any other place. Nor did he ever see so excellent a display of meat and drink, as there. And there was not one vessel from which he was served, that was not of gold or of silver. And Owain ate and drank, until late in the afternoon, when lo, they heard a mighty clamour in the castle, and Owain asked the maiden what that outcry was. They are administering extreme unction, said she, to the nobleman who owns the castle. And Owain went to sleep. The couch which the maiden had prepared for him was meet for Arthur himself, it was of scarlet, and fur, and satin, and sendal, and fine linen. In the middle of the night they heard a woeful outcry. What outcry again is this, said Owain. The nobleman who owned the castle is now dead, said the maiden. And a little after daybreak, they heard an exceeding loud clamour and wailing. And Owain asked the maiden what was the cause of it. They are bearing to the church the body of the nobleman who owned the castle. And Owain rose up, and clothed himself, and opened a window of the chamber, and looked towards the castle, and he could see neither the bounds, nor the extent of the hosts that filled the streets. And they were fully armed, and a vast number of women were with them, both on horseback and on foot, and all the ecclesiastics in the city, singing. And it seemed to Owain that the sky resounded with the vehemence of their cries, and with the noise of the trumpets, and with the singing of the ecclesiastics. In the midst of the throng, he beheld the bier, over which was a veil of white linen, and wax tapers were burning beside and around it, and none that supported the bier was lower in rank than a powerful baron. Never did Owain see an assemblage so gorgeous with satin, and silk, and sendal. And following the train, he beheld a lady with yellow hair falling over her shoulders, and stained with blood, and about her a dress of yellow satin, which was torn. Upon her feet were shoes of variegated leather. And it was a marvel that the ends of her fingers were not bruised, from the violence with which she smote her hands together. Truly she would have been the fairest lady Owain ever saw, had she been in her usual guise. And her cry was louder than the shout of the men, or the clamour of the trumpets. No sooner had he beheld the lady, than he became inflamed with her love, so that it took entire possession of him. Then he inquired of the maiden who the lady was. Heaven knows, replied the maiden, she may be said to be the fairest, and the most chaste, and the most liberal, and the wisest, and the most noble of women. And she is my mistress, and she is called the Countess of the Fountain, the wife of him whom thou didst slay yesterday. Verily, said Owain, she is the woman that I love best. Verily, said the maiden, she shall also love thee not a little. And with that the maid arose, and kindled a fire, and filled a pot with water, and placed it to warm, and she brought a towel of white linen, and placed it around Owain's neck, and she took a goblet of ivory, and a silver basin, and filled them with warm water, wherewith she washed Owain's head. Then she opened a wooden casket, and drew forth a razor, whose haft was of ivory, and upon which were 2 rivets of gold. And she shaved his beard, and she dried his head, and his throat, with the towel. Then she rose up from before Owain, and brought him to eat. And truly Owain had never so good a meal, nor was he ever so well served. When he had finished his repast, the maiden arranged his couch. Come here, said she, and sleep, and I will go and woo for thee. And Owain went to sleep, and the maiden shut the door of the chamber after her, and went towards the castle. When she came there, she found nothing but mourning, and sorrow, and the countess in her chamber could not bear the sight of anyone through grief. Eluned came and saluted her, but the countess answered her not. And the maiden bent down towards her, and said, What aileth thee, that thou answerest no one today? Eluned, said the countess, what change hath befallen thee, that thou hast not come to visit me in my grief? It was wrong in thee, and I having made thee rich, it was wrong in thee that thou didst not come to see me in my distress. That was wrong in thee. Truly, said Eluned, I thought thy good sense was greater than I find it to be. Is it well for thee to mourn after that good man, or for anything else, that thou canst not have? I declare to heaven, said the countess, that in the whole world there is not a man equal to him. Not so, said Eluned, for an ugly man would be as good as, or better than he. I declare to heaven, said the countess, that were it not repugnant to me to cause to be put to death one whom I have brought up, I would have thee executed, for making such a comparison to me. As it is, I will banish thee. I am glad, said Eluned, that thou hast no other cause to do so, than that I would have been of service to thee where thou didst not know what was to thine advantage. And henceforth evil betide whichever of us shall make the first advance towards reconciliation to the other, whether I should seek an invitation from thee, or thou of thine own accord shouldst send to invite me. With that Eluned went forth, and the countess arose and followed her to the door of the chamber, and began coughing loudly. And when Eluned looked back, the countess beckoned to her, and she returned to the countess. In truth, said the countess, evil is thy disposition, but if thou knowest what is to my advantage, declare it to me. I will do so, quoth she. Thou knowest that except by warfare and arms it is impossible for thee to preserve thy possessions. Delay not, therefore, to seek someone who can defend them. And how can I do that, said the countess. I will tell thee, said Eluned. Unless thou canst defend the fountain, thou canst not maintain thy dominions, and no one can defend the fountain, except it be a knight of Arthur's household, and I will go to Arthur's court, and ill betide me, if I return thence without a warrior who can guard the fountain as well as, or even better than, he who defended it formerly. That will be hard to perform, said the countess. Go, however, and make proof of that which thou hast promised. Eluned set out, under the pretence of going to Arthur's court, but she went back to the chamber where she had left Owain, and she tarried there with him as long as it might have taken her to have travelled to the court of King Arthur. And at the end of that time, she apparelled herself and went to visit the countess. And the countess was much rejoiced when she saw her, and inquired what news she brought from the court. I bring thee the best of news, said Eluned, for I have compassed the object of my mission. When wilt thou, that I should present to thee the chieftain who has come with me hither? Bring him here to visit me tomorrow, at midday, said the countess, and I will cause the town to be assembled by that time. And Eluned returned home. And the next day, at noon, Owain arrayed himself in a coat, and a surcoat, and a mantle of yellow satin, upon which was a broad band of gold lace, and on his feet were high shoes of variegated leather, which were fastened by golden clasps, in the form of lions. And they proceeded to the chamber of the countess. Right glad was the countess of their coming, and she gazed steadfastly upon Owain, and said, Eluned, this knight has not the look of a traveller. What harm is there in that, lady, said Eluned. I am certain, said the countess, that no other man than this chased the soul from the body of my lord. So much the better for thee, lady, said Lund, for had he not been stronger than thy lord he could not have deprived him of life. There is no remedy for that which is past, be it as it may. Go back to thine abode, said the countess, and I will take counsel. The next day the countess caused all her subjects to assemble, and showed them that her earldom was left defenseless, and that it could not be protected but with horse and arms, and military skill. Therefore said she, this is what I offer for your choice, either let one of you take me, or give your consent for me to take a husband from elsewhere to defend my dominions. So they came to the determination that it was better that she should have permission to marry someone from elsewhere, and, thereupon, she sent for the bishops and archbishops to celebrate her nuptials with Owain. And the men of the earldom did Owain homage. And Owain defended the fountain with lance and sword. And this is the manner in which he defended it. Whensoever a knight came there he overthrew him, and sold him for his full worth, and what he thus gained he divided among his barons and his knights, and no man in the whole world could be more beloved than he was by his subjects. And it was thus for the space of 3 years. It befell that as Gwalchmai went forth one day with King Arthur, he perceived him to be very sad and sorrowful. And Gwalchmai was much grieved to see Arthur in this state, and he questioned him, saying, "Oh, my lord, what has befallen thee?" "In sooth, Gwalchmai," said Arthur, "I am grieved concerning Owain, whom I have lost these 3 years, and I shall certainly die if the 4th year passes without my seeing him. Now I am sure, that it is through the tale which Kynon the son of Clydno related, that I have lost Owain. There is no need for thee, said Gwalchmai, to summon to arms thy whole dominions on this account, for thou thyself and the men of thy household will be able to avenge Owain, if he be slain, or to set him free, if he be in prison, and, if alive, to bring him back with thee." And it was settled according to what Gwalchmai had said. Then Arthur and the men of his household prepared to go and seek Owain, and their number was 3,000, besides their attendants. And Kynon the son of Clydno acted as their guide. And Arthur came to the castle where Kynon had been before, and when he came there the youths were shooting in the same place, and the yellow man was standing hard by. When the yellow man saw Arthur he greeted him, and invited him to the castle, and Arthur accepted his invitation, and they entered the castle together. And great as was the number of his retinue, their presence was scarcely observed in the castle, so vast was its extent. And the maidens rose up to wait on them, and the service of the maidens appeared to them all to excel any attendants they had ever met with, and even the pages who had charge of the horses were no worse served, that night, than Arthur himself would have been in his own palace. The next morning Arthur set out thence, with Kynon for his guide, and came to the place where the black man was. And the stature of the black man was more surprising to Arthur than it had been represented to him. And they came to the top of the wooded steep, and traversed the valley till they reached the green tree, where they saw the fountain, and the bowl, and the slab. And upon that, Kai came to Arthur and spoke to him. "My lord," said he, "I know the meaning of all this, and my request is, that thou wilt permit me to throw the water on the slab, and to receive the first adventure that may befall." And Arthur gave him leave. Then Kai threw a bowlful of water upon the slab, and immediately there came the thunder, and after the thunder the shower. And such a thunderstorm they had never known before, and many of the attendants who were in Arthur's train were killed by the shower. After the shower had ceased the sky became clear, and on looking at the tree they beheld it completely leafless. Then the birds descended upon the tree, and the song of the birds was far sweeter than any strain they had ever heard before. Then they beheld a knight on a coal-black horse, clothed in black satin, coming rapidly towards them. And Kai met him and encountered him, and it was not long before Kai was overthrown. And the knight withdrew, and Arthur and his host encamped for the night. And when they arose in the morning, they perceived the signal of combat upon the lance of the knight. And Kai came to Arthur, and spoke to him. "My lord," said he, "though I was overthrown yesterday, if it seem good to thee, I would gladly meet the knight again today." "Thou mayst do so," said Arthur. And Kai went towards the knight. And on the spot he overthrew Kai, and struck him with the head of his lance in the forehead, so that it broke his helmet and the headpiece, and pierced the skin and the flesh, the breadth of the spearhead, even to the bone. And Kai returned to his companions. After this, all the household of Arthur went forth, one after the other, to combat the knight, until there was not one that was not overthrown by him, except Arthur and Gwalchmai. And Arthur armed himself to encounter the knight. "Oh, my lord," said Gwalchmai, "permit me to fight with him first." And Arthur permitted him. And he went forth to meet the knight, having over himself and his horse a satin robe of honor which had been sent him by the daughter of the Earl of Ranji, and in this dress he was not known by any of the host. And they charged each other, and fought all that day until the evening, and neither of them was able to unhorse the other. The next day they fought with strong lances, and neither of them could obtain the mastery. And the third day they fought with exceeding strong lances. And they were incensed with rage, and fought furiously, even until noon. And they gave each other such a shock that the girths of their horses were broken, so that they fell over their horses' cruppers to the ground. And they rose up speedily, and drew their swords, and resumed the combat, and the multitude that witnessed their encounter felt assured that they had never before seen two men so valiant or so powerful. And had it been midnight, it would have been light from the fire that flashed from their weapons. And the knight gave Gwaltmai a blow that turned his helmet from off his face, so that the knight knew that it was Gwaltmai. Then Owain said, "My lord Gwaltmai, I did not know thee for my cousin, owing to the robe of honor that enveloped thee. Take my sword and my arms." Said Gwaltmai, "Thou, Owain, art the victor, take thou my sword." And with that Arthur saw that they were conversing, and advanced towards them. "My lord Arthur," said Gwaltmai, "here is Owain, who has vanquished me, and will not take my arms." "My lord," said Owain, "it is he that has vanquished me, and he will not take my sword." "Give me your swords," said Arthur, "and then neither of you has vanquished the other." Then Owain put his arms around Arthur's neck, and they embraced. And all the host hurried forward to see Owain, and to embrace him, and there was nigh being a loss of life, so great was the press. And they retired that night, and the next day Arthur prepared to depart. "My lord," said Owain, "this is not well of thee, for I have been absent from thee these 3 years, and during all that time, up to this very day, I have been preparing a banquet for thee, knowing that thou wouldst come to seek me. Tarry with me, therefore, until thou and thy attendants have recovered the fatigues of the journey, and have been anointed." And they all proceeded to the castle of the Countess of the Fountain, and the banquet which had been 3 years preparing was consumed in 3 months. Never had they a more delicious or agreeable banquet. And Arthur prepared to depart. Then he sent an embassy to the Countess, to beseech her to permit Owain to go with him for the space of 3 months, that he might show him to the nobles and the fair dames of the island of Britain. And the Countess gave her consent, although it was very painful to her. So Owain came with Arthur to the island of Britain. And when he was once more amongst his kindred and friends, he remained 3 years, instead of 3 months, with them. And as Owain one day sat at meat, in the city of Cerulean upon Usk, behold a damsel entered upon a bay horse, with a curling mane and covered with foam, and the bridle and so much as was seen of the saddle were of gold. And the damsel was arrayed in a dress of yellow satin. And she came up to Owain, and took the ring from off his hand. Thus said she, "Shall be treated the deceiver, the traitor, the faithless, the disgraced, and the beardless." And she turned her horse's head and departed. Then his adventure came to Owain's remembrance, and he was sorrowful, and having finished eating he went to his own abode and made preparations that night. And the next day he arose but did not go to the court, but wandered to the distant parts of the earth and to uncultivated mountains. And he remained there until all his apparel was worn out, and his body was wasted away, and his hair was grown long. And he went about with the wild beasts and fed with them, until they became familiar with him, but at length he grew so weak that he could no longer bear them company. Then he descended from the mountains to the valley, and came to a park that was the fairest in the world, and belonged to a widowed countess. One day the countess and her maidens went forth to walk by a lake, that was in the middle of the park. And they saw the form of a man. And they were terrified. Nevertheless they went near him, and touched him, and looked at him. And they saw that there was life in him, though he was exhausted by the heat of the sun. And the countess returned to the castle, and took a flask full of precious ointment, and gave it to one of her maidens. "Go with this," said she, "and take with thee yonder horse and clothing, and place them near the man we saw just now. And anoint him with this balsam, near his heart, and if there is life in him, he will arise through the efficacy of this balsam. Then watch what he will do." And the maiden departed from her, and poured the whole of the balsam upon Owain, and left the horse and the garments hard by, and went a little way off, and hid herself to watch him. In a short time she saw him begin to move his arms, and he rose up, and looked at his person, and became ashamed of the unseemliness of his appearance. Then he perceived the horse and the garments that were near him. And he crept forward till he was able to draw the garments to him from off the saddle. And he clothed himself, and with difficulty mounted the horse. Then the damsel discovered herself to him, and saluted him. And he was rejoiced when he saw her, and inquired of her, what land and what territory that was. Truly said the maiden, a widowed countess owns yonder castle. At the death of her husband, he left her 2 earldoms, but at this day she has but this one dwelling that has not been wrested from her by a young earl, who is her neighbor, because she refused to become his wife. That is pity, said Owain. And he and the maiden proceeded to the castle, and he alighted there, and the maiden conducted him to a pleasant chamber, and kindled a fire and left him. And the maiden came to the countess, and gave the flask into her hand. Ha, maiden, said the countess, where is all the balsam? Have I not used it all, said she. Oh, maiden, said the countess, I cannot easily forgive thee this. It is sad for me to have wasted 70 pounds worth of precious ointment upon a stranger whom I know not. However, maiden, wait thou upon him, until he is quite recovered. And the maiden did so, and furnished him with meat and drink, and fire, and lodging, and medicaments, until he was well again. And in 3 months he was restored to his former guise, and became even more comely than he had ever been before. One day Owain heard a great tumult, and a sound of arms in the castle, and he inquired of the maiden the cause thereof. The earl, said she, whom I mentioned to thee, has come before the castle, with a numerous army, to subdue the countess. And Owain inquired of her whether the countess had a horse and arms in her possession. She has the best in the world, said the maiden. Wilt thou go and request the loan of a horse and arms for me, said Owain, that I may go and look at this army? I will, said the maiden. And she came to the countess, and told her what Owain had said. And the countess laughed. Truly, said she, I will even give him a horse and arms forever. Such a horse and such arms had he never yet, and I am glad that they should be taken by him today, lest my enemies should have them against my will tomorrow. Yet I know not what he would do with them. The countess bade them bring out a beautiful black steed, upon which was a beechen saddle, and a suit of armor, for man and horse. And Owain armed himself, and mounted the horse, and went forth, attended by 2 pages completely equipped, with horses and arms. And when they came near to the earl's army, they could see neither its extent nor its extremity. And Owain asked the pages in which troop the earl was. In yonder troop, said they, in which are 4 yellow standards. 2 of them are before, and 2 behind him. Now, said Owain, do you return and await me near the portal of the castle. So they returned, and Owain pressed forward until he met the earl. And Owain drew him completely out of his saddle, and turned his horse's head towards the castle, and though it was with difficulty, he brought the earl to the portal, where the pages awaited him. And in they came. And Owain presented the earl as a gift to the countess, and said to her, behold a requital to thee for thy blessed balsam. The army encamped around the castle. And the earl restored to the countess the 2 earldoms he had taken from her, as a ransom for his life, and for his freedom he gave her the half of his own dominions, and all his gold, and his silver, and his jewels, besides hostages. And Owain took his departure. And the countess and all her subjects besought him to remain, but Owain chose rather to wander through distant lands and deserts. And as he journeyed, he heard a loud yelling in a wood. And it was repeated a second and a third time. And Owain went towards the spot, and beheld a huge craggy mound, in the middle of the wood, on the side of which was a grey rock. And there was a cleft in the rock, and a serpent was within the cleft. And near the rock stood a black lion, and every time the lion sought to go thence, the serpent darted towards him to attack him. And Owain unsheathed his sword, and drew near to the rock, and as the serpent sprang out, he struck him with his sword, and cut him in 2. And he dried his sword, and went on his way, as before. But behold, the lion followed him, and played about him, as though it had been a greyhound that he had reared. They proceeded thus throughout the day, until the evening. And when it was time for Owain to take his rest, he dismounted, and turned his horse loose in a flat and wooded meadow. And he struck fire, and when the fire was kindled, the lion brought him fuel enough to last for 3 nights. And the lion disappeared. And presently the lion returned, bearing a fine large roebuck. And he threw it down before Owain, who went towards the fire with it. And Owain took the roebuck, and skinned it, and placed collops of its flesh upon skewers, around the fire. The rest of the buck he gave to the lion to devour. While he was doing this, he heard a deep sigh near him, and a second, and a third. And Owain called out to know whether the sigh he heard proceeded from a mortal, and he received answer that it did. "Who art thou?" said Owain. "Truly," said the voice, "I am Lund, the handmaiden of the Countess of the Fountain." "And what dost thou here?" said Owain. "I am imprisoned," said she, "on account of the knight who came from Arthur's court, and married the Countess. And he stayed a short time with her, but he afterwards departed for the court of Arthur, and has not returned since. And he was the friend I loved best in the world." And 2 of the pages in the Countess's chamber traduced him, and called him a deceiver. And I told them that they too were not a match for him alone. So they imprisoned me in the stone vault, and said that I should be put to death, unless he came himself to deliver me, by a certain day, and that is no further off than the day after tomorrow. And I have no one to send to seek him for me. And his name is Owain the son of Urien. And art thou certain that if that knight knew all this, he would come to thy rescue?" "I am most certain of it," said she. When the collops were cooked, Owain divided them into 2 parts, between himself and the maiden, and after they had eaten, they talked together, until the day dawned. And the next morning Owain inquired of the damsel, if there was any place where he could get food and entertainment for that night. "There is, Lord," said she, "cross over yonder, and go along the side of the river, and in a short time thou wilt see a great castle, in which are many towers, and the earl who owns that castle is the most hospitable man in the world. There thou mayst spend the night." Never did sentinel keep stricter watch over his lord, than the lion that night over Owain. And Owain accoutred his horse, and passed across by the ford, and came in sight of the castle. And he entered it, and was honorably received. And his horse was well cared for, and plenty of fodder was placed before him. Then the lion went and lay down in the horse's manger, so that none of the people of the castle dared to approach him. The treatment which Owain met with there was such as he had never known elsewhere, for everyone was as sorrowful as though death had been upon him. And they went to meat, and the earl sat upon one side of Owain, and on the other side his only daughter. And Owain had never seen any more lovely than she. Then the lion came and placed himself between Owain's feet, and he fed him with every kind of food that he took himself. And he never saw anything equal to the sadness of the people. In the middle of the repast the earl began to bid Owain welcome. Then said Owain, "Behold, it is time for thee to be cheerful." "Heaven knows," said the earl, "that it is not thy coming that makes us sorrowful, but we have cause enough for sadness and care." "What is that?" said Owain. "I have 2 sons," replied the earl, "and yesterday they went to the mountains to hunt. Now there is on the mountain a monster who kills men and devours them, and he seized my sons, and tomorrow is the time he has fixed to be here, and he threatens that he will then slay my sons before my eyes, unless I will deliver into his hands this my daughter. He has the form of a man, but in stature he is no less than a giant." "Truly," said Owain, "that is lamentable. And which wilt thou do?" "Heaven knows," said the earl, "it will be better that my sons should be slain against my will, than that I should voluntarily give up my daughter to him to ill-treat and destroy." Then they talked about other things, and Owain stayed there that night. The next morning they heard an exceeding great clamor, which was caused by the coming of the giant with the 2 youths. And the earl was anxious both to protect his castle and to release his 2 sons. Then Owain put on his armor and went forth to encounter the giant, and the lion followed him. And when the giant saw that Owain was armed, he rushed towards him and attacked him. And the lion fought with the giant much more fiercely than Owain did. "Truly," said the giant, "I should find no difficulty in fighting with thee, were it not for the animal that is with thee." Upon that Owain took the lion back to the castle and shut the gate upon him, and then he returned to fight the giant, as before. And the lion roared very loud, for he heard that it went hard with Owain. And he climbed up till he reached the top of the earl's hall, and thence he got to the top of the castle, and he sprang down from the walls and went and joined Owain. And the lion gave the giant a stroke with his paw, which tore him from his shoulder to his hip, and his heart was laid bare, and the giant fell down dead. Then Owain restored the 2 youths to their father. The earl besought Owain to remain with him, and he would not, but set forward towards the meadow where Lund was. And when he came there he saw a great fire kindled, and 2 youths with beautiful curling auburn hair were leading the maiden to cast her into the fire. And Owain asked them what charge they had against her. And they told him of the compact that was between them, as the maiden had done the night before. And said they, Owain has failed her, therefore we are taking her to be burnt. Truly said Owain, he is a good knight, and if he knew that the maiden was in such peril, I marvel that he came not to her rescue, but if you will accept me in his stead, I will do battle with you. We will set the youths, by him who made us. And they attacked Owain, and he was hard beset by them. And with that the lion came to Owain's assistance, and they two got the better of the young men. And they said to him, Chieftain, it was not agreed that we should fight save with thyself alone, and it is harder for us to contend with yonder animal than with thee. And Owain put the lion in the place where the maiden had been imprisoned, and blocked up the door with stones, and he went to fight with the young men, as before. But Owain had not his usual strength, and the two youths pressed hard upon him. And the lion roared incessantly at seeing Owain in trouble, and he burst through the wall until he found a way out, and rushed upon the young men, and instantly slew them. So Lund was saved from being burned. Then Owain returned with Lund to the dominions of the Countess of the Fountain. And when he went thence he took the Countess with him to Arthur's court, and she was his wife as long as she lived. And then he took the road that led to the court of the savage black man, and Owain fought with him, and the lion did not quit Owain until he had vanquished him. And when he reached the court of the savage black man he entered the hall, and beheld 24 ladies, the fairest that could be seen. And the garments which they had on were not worth 24 pence, and they were as sorrowful as death. And Owain asked them the cause of their sadness. And they said, We are the daughters of earls, and we all came here with our husbands, whom we dearly loved. And we were received with honor and rejoicing. And we were thrown into a state of stupor, and while we were thus, the demon who owns this castle slew all our husbands, and took from us our horses, and our raiment, and our gold, and our silver, and the corpses of our husbands are still in this house, and many others with them. And this, chieftain, is the cause of our grief, and we are sorry that thou art come hither, lest harm should befall thee. And Owain was grieved when he heard this. And he went forth from the castle, and he beheld a knight approaching him, who saluted him in a friendly and cheerful manner, as if he had been a brother. And this was the savage black man. In very sooth said Owain, it is not to seek thy friendship that I am here. In sooth said he, thou shalt not find it then. And with that they charged each other, and fought furiously. And Owain overcame him, and bound his hands behind his back. Then the black savage besought Owain to spare his life, and spoke thus, My lord Owain, said he, it was foretold that thou shouldst come hither and vanquish me, and thou hast done so. I was a robber here, and my house was a house of spoil, but grant me my life, and I will become the keeper of an hospice, and I will maintain this house as an hospice for weak and for strong, as long as I live, for the good of thy soul. And Owain accepted this proposal of him, and remained there that night. And the next day he took the 24 ladies, and their horses, and their raiment, and what they possessed of goods and jewels, and proceeded with them to Arthur's court. And if Arthur was rejoiced when he saw him, after he had lost him the first time, his joy was now much greater. And of those ladies, such as wished to remain in Arthur's court remained there, and such as wished to depart departed. And thenceforward Owain dwelt at Arthur's court greatly beloved, as the head of his household, until he went away with his followers, and those were the army of 300 ravens which Ken Verchine had left him. And wherever Owain went with these he was victorious. And this is the tale of the Lady of the Fountain. Pajor the son of Evrock. Earl Evrock owned the earldom of the north. And he had 7 sons. And Evrock maintained himself not so much by his own possessions as by attending tournaments, and wars, and combats. And, as it often befalls those who join in encounters and wars, he was slain, and 6 of his sons likewise went with these he come. Now the name of his 7th son was Pajor, and he was the youngest of them. And he was not slain to go to war with his sons likewise, otherwise he might have been slain as well as his father and brothers. His mother was a scheming and thoughtful woman, and she was very solicitous concerning this her only son and his possessions. So she took counsel with herself to leave the inhabited country, and to flee to the deserts and unfrequented wildernesses. And she permitted none to bear her company thither but women and boys, and spiritless men, who were both unaccustomed and unequal to war and fighting. And none dared to bring either horses or arms where her son was, lest he should set his mind upon them. And the youth went daily to divert himself in the forest, by flinging sticks and staves. And one day he saw his mother's flock of goats, and near the goats 2 hinds were standing. And he marveled greatly that these two should be without horns, while the others had them. And he thought they had long run wild, and on that account they had lost their horns. And by activity and swiftness of foot, he drove the hinds and the goats together into the house which there was for the goats at the extremity of the forest. Then Pajor returned to his mother. "Ah, mother," said he, "a marvelous thing have I seen in the wood. 2 of thy goats have run wild, and lost their horns, through their having been so long missing in the wood. And no man had ever more trouble than I had to drive them in." Then they all arose and went to see. And when they beheld the hinds they were greatly astonished. And one day they saw 3 knights coming along the horse road on the borders of the forest. And the 3 knights were Gwalgmai the son of Gwyar, and Gwystwyl, and Owain the son of Urien. And Owain kept on the track of the knight who had divided the apples in Arthur's court, whom they were in pursuit of. Mother said, "Pajor, what are those yonder?" "They are angels, my son," said she. "By my faith," said Pajor, "I will go and become an angel with them." And Pajor went to the road, and met them. "Tell me, good soul," said Owain, "sawest thou a knight pass this way, either today or yesterday?" "I know not," answered he, "what a knight is." "Such an one as I am," said Owain. "If thou wilt tell me what I ask thee, I will tell thee that which thou askest me." "Gladly will I do so," replied Owain. "What is this?" demanded Pajor, concerning the saddle. "It is a saddle," said Owain. Then he asked about all the accoutrements which he saw upon the men, and the horses, and the arms, and what they were for, and how they were used. And Owain showed him all these things fully, and told him what use was made of them. "Go forward," said Pajor, "for I saw such an one as thou inquirest for, and I will follow thee." Then Pajor returned to his mother and her company, and he said to her, "Mother, those were not angels, but honorable knights." Then his mother swooned away. And Pajor went to the place where they kept the horses that carried firewood, and that brought meat and drink from the inhabited country to the desert. And he took a bony piebald horse, which seemed to him the strongest of them. And he pressed a pack into the form of a saddle, and with twisted twigs he imitated the trappings which he had seen upon the horses. And when Pajor came again to his mother, the countess had recovered from her swoon. "My son," said she, "desirest thou to ride forth?" "Yes, with thy leave," said he. "Wait, then, that I may counsel thee before thou goest." "Willingly," he answered, "speak quickly." "Go forward," then she said, "to the court of Arthur, where there are the best, and the boldest, and the most bountiful of men. And wherever thou seest a church, repeat there thy paternoster unto it. And if thou see meat and drink, and have need of them, and none have the kindness or the courtesy to give them to thee, take them thyself. If thou hear an outcry, proceed towards it, especially if it be the outcry of a woman. If thou see a fair jewel, possess thyself of it, and give it to another, for thus thou shalt obtain praise. If thou see a fair woman, pay thy court to her, whether she will or no, for thus thou wilt render thyself a better and more esteemed man than thou wast before." After this discourse, Pajor mounted the horse, and taking a handful of sharp-pointed forks in his hand, he rode forth. And he journeyed 2 days and 2 nights in the woody wildernesses, and in desert places, without food and without drink. And then he came to a vast wild wood, and far within the wood he saw a fair even glade, and in the glade he saw a tent, and the tent seeming to him to be a church, he repeated his paternoster to it. And he went towards it, and the door of the tent was open. And a golden chair was near the door. And on the chair sat a lovely auburn-haired maiden, with a golden frontlet on her forehead, and sparkling stones in the frontlet, and with a large gold ring on her hand. And Pajor dismounted, and entered the tent. And the maiden was glad at his coming, and bade him welcome. At the entrance of the tent he saw food, and 2 flasks full of wine, and 2 loaves of fine wheaten flour, and collops of the flesh of the wild boar. "My mother told me," said Pajor, "wheresoever I saw meat and drink, to take it." "Take the meat and welcome, chieftain," said she. So Pajor took half of the meat and of the liquor himself, and left the rest to the maiden. And when Pajor had finished eating, he bent upon his knee before the maiden. "My mother," said he, "told me, wheresoever I saw a fair jewel, to take it." "Do so, my soul," said she. So Pajor took the ring. And he mounted his horse, and proceeded on his journey. After this, behold, the knight came to whom the tent belonged, and he was the lord of the glade. And he saw the track of the horse, and he said to the maiden, "Tell me who has been here since I departed." "A man," said she, "of wonderful demeanor." And she described to him what Pajor's appearance and conduct had been. Tell me, said he, did he offer thee any wrong? No, answered the maiden, by my faith, he harmed me not. By my faith, I do not believe thee, and until I can meet with him, and revenge the insult he has done me, and wreak my vengeance upon him, thou shalt not remain 2 nights in the same house. And the knight arose, and set forth to seek Pajor. Meanwhile Pajor journeyed on towards Arthur's court. And before he reached it, another knight had been there, who gave a ring of thick gold at the door of the gate for holding his horse, and went into the hall where Arthur and his household, and Gwenhwyvar and her maidens, were assembled. And the page of the chamber was serving Gwenhwyvar with a golden goblet. Then the knight dashed the liquor that was therein upon her face, and upon her stomacher, and gave her a violent blow on the face, and said, If any have the boldness to dispute this goblet with me, and to revenge the insult to Gwenhwyvar, let him follow me to the meadow, and there I will await him. So the knight took his horse, and rode to the meadow. And all the household hung down their heads, lest any of them should be requested to go and avenge the insult to Gwenhwyvar. For it seemed to them, that no one would have ventured on so daring an outrage, unless he possessed such powers, through magic or charms, that none could be able to take vengeance upon him. Then, behold, Pajor entered the hall, upon the bony piebald horse, with the uncouth trappings upon it, and in this way he traversed the whole length of the hall. In the center of the hall stood Kai. Tell me, tall man, said Pajor, is that Arthur yonder?
Hi, Kayla.
What wouldest thou with Arthur? Asked Kai.
What are you doing?
My mother told me to go to Arthur, and receive the honor of knighthood.
I'm doing a video.
By my faith, said he, thou
Oh,
art
that was that
newly equipped
nice.
with horse and with arms.
You're on the video. You're like
Thereupon
my
he was
second
perceived by
voice.
all the household, and
I
they threw
know.
sticks at him.
I texted
Then,
the song. I said,
behold,
call
the dwarf
me.
came forward. He had already been a year at Arthur's court, both he and a female dwarf. They had craved harborage of Arthur, and had obtained it, and during the whole year, neither of them had spoken a single word to anyone. When the dwarf beheld Pajor, ha ha, said he, the welcome of heaven be unto thee, goodly Pajor, son of Evrog, the chief of warriors, and flower of knighthood. Truly, said Kai, thou art ill-taught to remain a year mute at Arthur's court, with choice of society, and now, before the face of Arthur and all his household, to call out, and declare such a man as this the chief of warriors, and the flower of knighthood. And he gave him such a box on the ear that he fell senseless to the ground. Then exclaimed the female dwarf, ha ha, goodly Pajor, son of Evrog, the welcome of heaven be unto thee, flower of knights, and light of chivalry. Of a truth, maiden, said Kai, thou art ill-bred to remain mute for a year at the court of Arthur, and then to speak as thou dost of such a man as this. And Kai kicked her with his foot, so that she fell to the ground senseless. Tall man, said Pajor, show me which is Arthur. Hold thy peace, said Kai, and go after the knight who went hence to the meadow, and take from him the goblet, and overthrow him, and possess thyself of his horse and arms, and then thou shalt receive the order of knighthood. I will do so, tall man, said Pajor. So he turned his horse's head towards the meadow. And when he came there, the knight was riding up and down, proud of his strength, and valor, and noble mien. Tell me, said the knight, didst thou see anyone coming after me from the court? The tall man that was there, said he, desired me to come, and overthrow thee, and to take from thee the goblet, and thy horse and thy armor for myself. Silence, said the knight, go back to the court, and tell Arthur, from me, either to come himself, or to send some other to fight with me, and unless he do so quickly, I will not wait for him. By my faith, said Pajor, choose thou whether it shall be willingly or unwillingly, but I will have the horse, and the arms, and the goblet. And upon this the knight ran at him furiously, and struck him a violent blow with the shaft of his spear, between the neck and the shoulder. Ha ha, lad, said Pajor, my mother's servants were not used to play with me in this wise, therefore, thus will I play with thee. And thereupon he struck him with a sharp-pointed fork, and it hit him in the eye, and came out at the back of his neck, so that he instantly fell down lifeless. Verily, said Owain the son of Urien to Kai, thou wert ill-advised, when thou didst send that madman after the knight. For one of two things must befall him. He must either be overthrown, or slain. If he is overthrown by the knight, he will be counted by him to be an honorable person of the court, and an eternal disgrace will it be to Arthur and his warriors. And if he is slain, the disgrace will be the same, and moreover, his sin will be upon him, therefore will I go to see what has befallen him. So Owain went to the meadow, and he found Pajor dragging the man about. What art thou doing thus, said Owain. This iron coat, said Pajor, will never come from off him, not by my efforts, at any rate. And Owain unfastened his armor and his clothes. Here, my good soul, said he, is a horse and armor better than thine. Take them joyfully, and come with me to Arthur, to receive the order of knighthood, for thou dost merit it. May I never show my face again if I go, said Pajor, but take thou the goblet to Gwenhwyvar, and tell Arthur, that wherever I am, I will be his vassal, and will do him what profit and service I am able. And say that I will not come to his court until I have encountered the tall man that is there, to revenge the injury he did to the dwarf and dwarfess. And Owain went back to the court, and related all these things to Arthur and Gwenhwyvar, and to all the household. And Pajor rode forward. And as he proceeded, behold, a knight met him. Whence comest thou, said the knight. I come from Arthur's court, said Pajor. Art thou one of his men, asked he. Yes, by my faith, he answered. A good service, truly, is that of Arthur. Wherefore sayest thou so, said Pajor. I will tell thee, said he, I have always been Arthur's enemy, and all such of his men as I have ever encountered I have slain. And without further parlance they fought, and it was not long before Pajor brought him to the ground, over his horse's crupper. Then the knight besought his mercy. Mercy thou shalt have, said Pajor, if thou wilt make oath to me, that thou wilt go to Arthur's court, and tell him that it was I that overthrew thee, for the honor of his service, and say, that I will never come to the court until I have avenged the insult offered to the dwarf and dwarfess. The knight pledged him his faith of this, and proceeded to the court of Arthur, and said as he had promised, and conveyed the threat to Kai. And Pajor rode forward. And within that week he encountered 16 knights, and overthrew them all shamefully. And they all went to Arthur's court, taking with them the same message which the first knight had conveyed from Pajor, and the same threat which he had sent to Kai. And thereupon Kai was reproved by Arthur, and Kai was greatly grieved thereat. And Pajor rode forward. And he came to a vast and desert wood, on the confines of which was a lake. And on the other side was a fair castle. And on the border of the lake he saw a venerable, hoary-headed man, sitting upon a velvet cushion, and having a garment of velvet upon him. And his attendants were fishing in the lake. When the hoary-headed man beheld Pajor approaching, he arose and went towards the castle. And the old man was lame. Pajor rode to the palace, and the door was open, and he entered the hall. And there was the hoary-headed man sitting on a cushion, and a large blazing fire burning before him. And the household and the company arose to meet Pajor, and disarrayed him. And the man asked the youth to sit on the cushion, and they sat down, and conversed together. When it was time, the tables were laid, and they went to meat. And when they had finished their meal, the man inquired of Pajor if he knew well how to fight with the sword. I know not, said Pajor, but were I to be taught, doubtless I should. Whoever can play well with the cudgel and shield, will also be able to fight with a sword. And the man had 2 sons, the one had yellow hair, and the other auburn. Arise, youth, said he, and play with the cudgel and the shield. And so did they. Tell me, my soul, said the man, which of the youths thinkest thou plays best? I think, said Pajor, that the yellow-haired youth could draw blood from the other, if he chose. Arise then, my life, and take the cudgel and the shield from the hand of the youth with the auburn hair, and draw blood from the yellow-haired youth if thou canst. So Pajor arose, and went to play with the yellow-haired youth, and he lifted up his arm, and struck him such a mighty blow, that his brow fell over his eye, and the blood flowed forth. Ah, my life, said the man, come now, and sit down, for thou wilt become the best fighter with the sword of any in this island, and I am thy uncle, thy mother's brother. And with me shalt thou remain a space, in order to learn the manners and customs of different countries, and courtesy, and gentleness, and noble bearing. Leave, then, the habits and the discourse of thy mother, and I will be thy teacher, and I will raise thee to the rank of knight from this time forward. And thus do thou. If thou seest aught to cause thee wonder, ask not the meaning of it. If no one has the courtesy to inform thee, the reproach will not fall upon thee, but upon me that am thy teacher. And they had abundance of honor and service. And when it was time they went to sleep. At the break of day, Pajor arose, and took his horse, and with his uncle's permission he rode forth. And he came to a vast desert wood, and at the further end of the wood was a meadow, and on the other side of the meadow he saw a large castle. And thitherward Pajor bent his way, and he found the gate open, and he proceeded to the hall. And he beheld a stately hoary-headed man sitting on one side of the hall, and many pages around him, who arose to receive and to honor Pajor. And they placed him by the side of the owner of the palace. Then they discoursed together, and when it was time to eat, they caused Pajor to sit beside the nobleman during the repast. And when they had eaten and drunk as much as they desired, the nobleman asked Pajor whether he could fight with a sword. Were I to receive instruction, said Pajor, I think I could. Now, there was on the floor of the hall a huge staple, as large as a warrior could grasp. Take yonder sword, said the man to Pajor, and strike the iron staple. So Pajor arose and struck the staple, so that he cut it in two, and the sword broke into two parts also. Place the two parts together, and reunite them, and Pajor placed them together, and they became entire as they were before. And a second time he struck upon the staple, so that both it and the sword broke in two, and as before they reunited. And the third time he gave a like blow, and placed the broken parts together, and neither the staple nor the sword would unite as before. Youth, said the nobleman, come now, and sit down, and my blessing be upon thee. Thou fightest best with the sword of any man in the kingdom. Thou hast arrived at 2/3 of thy strength, and the other third thou hast not yet obtained, and when thou attainest to thy full power, none will be able to contend with thee. I am thy uncle, thy mother's brother, and I am brother to the man in whose house thou wast last night. Then Pajor and his uncle discoursed together, and he beheld two youths enter the hall, and proceed up to the chamber, bearing a spear of mighty size, with 3 streams of blood flowing from the point to the ground. And when all the company saw this, they began wailing and lamenting. But for all that, the man did not break off his discourse with Pajor. And as he did not tell Pajor the meaning of what he saw, he forbore to ask him concerning it. And when the clamour had a little subsided, behold 2 maidens entered, with a large salver between them, in which was a man's head, surrounded by a profusion of blood. And thereupon the company of the court made so great an outcry, that it was irksome to be in the same hall with them. But at length they were silent. And when time was that they should sleep, Pajor was brought into a fair chamber. And the next day, with his uncle's permission, he rode forth. And he came to a wood, and far within the wood he heard a loud cry, and he saw a beautiful woman with auburn hair, and a horse with a saddle upon it, standing near her, and a corpse by her side. And as she strove to place the corpse upon the horse, it fell to the ground, and thereupon she made a great lamentation. Tell me, sister, said Pajor, wherefore art thou bewailing? Oh, accursed Pajor, little pity has my ill fortune ever met with from thee. Wherefore, said Pajor, am I accursed? Because thou wast the cause of thy mother's death, for when thou didst ride forth against her will, anguish seized upon her heart, so that she died, and therefore art thou accursed. And the dwarf and the dwarfess that thou sawest at Arthur's court were the dwarfs of thy father and mother, and I am thy foster sister, and this was my wedded husband, and he was slain by the knight that is in the glade in the wood, and do not thou go near him, lest thou shouldest be slain by him likewise. My sister, thou dost reproach me wrongfully, through my having so long remained amongst you. I shall scarcely vanquish him, and had I continued longer, it would, indeed, be difficult for me to succeed. Cease, therefore, thy lamenting, for it is of no avail, and I will bury the body, and then I will go in quest of the knight, and see if I can do vengeance upon him. And when he had buried the body, they went to the place where the knight was, and found him riding proudly along the glade, and he inquired of Pajor whence he came. I come from Arthur's court. And art thou one of Arthur's men? Yes, by my faith. A profitable alliance, truly, is that of Arthur. And without further parlance, they encountered one another, and immediately Pajor overthrew the knight, and he besought mercy of Pajor. Mercy shalt thou have, said he, upon these terms, that thou take this woman in marriage, and do her all the honour and reverence in thy power, seeing thou hast, without cause, slain her wedded husband, and that thou go to Arthur's court, and show him that it was I that overthrew thee, to do him honour and service, and that thou tell him that I will never come to his court again until I have met with the tall man that is there, to take vengeance upon him for his insult to the dwarf and dwarfess. And he took the knight's assurance, that he would perform all this. Then the knight provided the lady with a horse and garments that were suitable for her, and took her with him to Arthur's court. And he told Arthur all that had occurred, and gave the defiance to Kai. And Arthur and all his household reproved Kai, for having driven such a youth as Pajor from his court. Said Owain the son of Urien, this youth will never come into the court until Kai has gone forth from it. By my faith, said Arthur, I will search all the deserts in the island of Britain, until I find Pajor, and then let him and his adversary do their utmost to each other. Then Pajor rode forward. And he came to a desert wood, where he saw not the track either of men or animals, and where there was nothing but bushes and weeds. And at the upper end of the wood he saw a vast castle, wherein were many strong towers, and when he came near the gate, he found the weeds taller than he had seen them elsewhere. And he struck the gate with the shaft of his lance, and thereupon behold a lean, auburn-haired youth came to an opening in the battlements. Choose thou, chieftain, said he, whether shall I open the gate unto thee, or shall I announce unto those that are chief, that thou art at the gateway? Say that I am here, said Pajor, and if it is desired that I should enter, I will go in. And the youth came back, and opened the gate for Pajor. And when he went into the hall, he beheld 18 youths, lean and red-headed, of the same height, and of the same aspect, and of the same dress, and of the same age as the one who had opened the gate for him. And they were well skilled in courtesy and in service. And they disarrayed him. Then they sat down to discourse. Thereupon, behold, 5 maidens came from the chamber into the hall. And Pajor was certain that he had never seen another of so fair an aspect as the chief of the maidens. And she had an old garment of satin upon her, which had once been handsome, but was then so tattered, that her skin could be seen through it. And whiter was her skin than the bloom of crystal, and her hair and her 2 eyebrows were blacker than jet, and on her cheeks were 2 red spots, redder than whatever is reddest. And the maiden welcomed Pajor, and put her arms about his neck, and made him sit down beside her. Not long after this he saw 2 nuns enter, and a flask full of wine was borne by one, and 6 loaves of white bread by the other. Lady, said they, heaven is witness, that there is not so much of food and liquor as this left in yonder convent this night. Then they went to meat, and Pajor observed that the maiden wished to give more of the food and of the liquor to him than to any of the others. My sister, said Pajor, I will share out the food and the liquor. Not so, my soul, said she. By my faith, but I will. So Pajor took the bread, and he gave an equal portion of it to each alike, as well as a cupful of the liquor. And when it was time for them to sleep, a chamber was prepared for Pajor, and he went to rest. Behold, sister, said the youths to the fairest and most exalted of the maidens, we have counsel for thee. What may it be? She inquired. Go to the youth that is in the upper chamber, and offer to become his wife, or the lady of his love, if it seem well to him. That were indeed unfitting, said she. Hitherto I have not been the lady love of any knight, and to make him such an offer before I am wooed by him, that, truly, can I not do. By our confession to heaven, unless thou actest thus, we will leave thee here to thy enemies, to do as they will with thee. And through fear of this, the maiden went forth, and shedding tears, she proceeded to the chamber. And with the noise of the door opening, Pajor awoke, and the maiden was weeping and lamenting. Tell me, my sister, said Pajor, wherefore dost thou weep? I will tell thee, Lord, said she. My father possessed these dominions as their chief, and this palace was his, and with it he held the best earldom in the kingdom. Then the son of another earl sought me of my father, and I was not willing to be given unto him, and my father would not give me against my will, either to him or any earl in the world. And my father had no child except myself. And after my father's death, these dominions came into my own hands, and then was I less willing to accept him than before. So he made war upon me, and conquered all my possessions, except this one house. And through the valor of the men whom thou hast seen, who are my foster brothers, and the strength of the house, it can never be taken while food and drink remain. And now our provisions are exhausted, but, as thou hast seen, we have been fed by the nuns, to whom the country is free. And at length they also are without supply of food or liquor. And at no later date than tomorrow, the Earl will come against this place with all his forces, and if I fall into his power, my fate will be no better than to be given over to the grooms of his horses. Therefore, Lord, I am come to offer to place myself in thy hands, that thou mayest succor me, either by taking me hence, or by defending me here, whichever may seem best unto thee. Go, my sister, said he, and sleep, nor will I depart from thee until I do that which thou requirest, or prove whether I can assist thee or not. The maiden went again to rest, and the next morning she came to Pajor, and saluted him. Heaven prosper thee, my soul, and what tidings dost thou bring? None other than that the Earl and all his forces have alighted at the gate, and I never beheld any place so covered with tents, and thronged with knights challenging others to the combat. Truly, said Pajor, let my horse be made ready. So his horse was accoutred, and he arose and sallied forth to the meadow. And there was a knight riding proudly along the meadow, having raised the signal for battle. And they encountered, and Pajor threw the knight over his horse's crupper to the ground. And at the close of the day, one of the chief knights came to fight with him, and he overthrew him also, so that he besought his mercy. Who art thou? Said Pajor. Verily, said he, I am master of the household to the earl. And how much of the countess's possessions is there in thy power? The third part, verily, answered he. Then said Pajor, restore to her the third of her possessions in full, and all the profit thou hast made by them, and bring meat and drink for 100 men, with their horses and arms, to her court this night. And thou shalt remain her captive, unless she wish to take thy life. And this he did forthwith. And that night the maiden was right joyful, and they fared plenteously. And the next day Pajor rode forth to the meadow, and that day he vanquished a multitude of the host. And at the close of the day, there came a proud and stately knight, and Pajor overthrew him, and he besought his mercy. Who art thou? Said Pajor. I am steward of the palace, said he. And how much of the maiden's possessions are under thy control? 1/3 part, answered he. Verily, said Pajor, thou shalt fully restore to the maiden her possessions, and, moreover, thou shalt give her meat and drink for 200 men, and their horses and their arms. And for thyself, thou shalt be her captive. And immediately it was so done. And the third day Pajor rode forth to the meadow, and he vanquished more that day than on either of the preceding. And at the close of the day, an earl came to encounter him, and he overthrew him, and he besought his mercy. Who art thou? Said Pajor. I am the earl, said he. I will not conceal it from thee. Verily, said Pajor, thou shalt restore the whole of the maiden's earldom, and shalt give her thine own earldom in addition thereto, and meat and drink for 300 men, and their horses and arms, and thou thyself shalt remain in her power. And thus it was fulfilled. And Pajor tarried 3 weeks in the country, causing tribute and obedience to be paid to the maiden, and the government to be placed in her hands. With thy leave, said Pajor, I will go hence. Verily, my brother, desirest thou this? Yes, by my faith, and had it not been for love of thee, I should not have been here thus long. My soul, said she, who art thou? I am Pajor the son of Evrork from the north, and if ever thou art in trouble or in danger, acquaint me therewith, and if I can, I will protect thee. So Pajor rode forth. And far thence there met him a lady, mounted on a horse that was lean, and covered with sweat, and she saluted the youth. Whence comest thou, my sister? Then she told him the cause of her journey. Now she was the wife of the lord of the glade. Behold, said he, I am the knight through whom thou art in trouble, and he shall repent it, who has treated thee thus. Thereupon, behold, a knight rode up, and he inquired of Pajor, if he had seen a knight such as he was seeking. Hold thy peace, said Pajor, I am he whom thou seekest, and by my faith, thou deservest ill of thy household for thy treatment of the maiden, for she is innocent concerning me. So they encountered, and they were not long in combat ere Pajor overthrew the knight, and he besought his mercy. Mercy thou shalt have, said Pajor, so thou wilt return by the way thou camest, and declare that thou holdest the maiden innocent, and so that thou wilt acknowledge unto her the reverse thou hast sustained at my hands. And the knight plighted him his faith thereto. Then Pajor rode forward. And above him he beheld a castle, and thitherward he went. And he struck upon the gate with his lance, and then, behold, a comely auburn-haired youth opened the gate, and he had the stature of a warrior, and the years of a boy. And when Pajor came into the hall, there was a tall and stately lady sitting in a chair, and many handmaidens around her, and the lady rejoiced at his coming. And when it was time, they went to meat. And after their repast was finished, it were well for thee, chieftain, said she, to go elsewhere to sleep. Wherefore can I not sleep here, said Pajor. 9 sorceresses are here, my soul, of the sorceresses of Gloucester, and their father and their mother are with them, and unless we can make our escape before daybreak, we shall be slain, and already they have conquered and laid waste all the country, except this one dwelling. Behold, said Pajor, I will remain here tonight, and if you are in trouble, I will do you what service I can, but harm shall you not receive from me. So they went to rest. And with the break of day, Pajor heard a dreadful outcry. And he hastily arose, and went forth in his vest and his doublet, with his sword about his neck, and he saw a sorceress overtake one of the watch, who cried out violently. Pajor attacked the sorceress, and struck her upon the head with his sword, so that he flattened her helmet and her headpiece like a dish upon her head. Thy mercy, goodly Pajor, son of Evrork, and the mercy of heaven. How knowest thou, hag, that I am Pajor? by destiny, and the folk knowledge that I should suffer harm from thee. And thou shalt take a horse and armor of me, and with me thou shalt go to learn chivalry and the use of thy arms. Said Pajor, thou shalt have mercy, if thou pledge thy faith thou wilt never more injure the dominions of the Countess. And Pajor took surety of this, and with permission of the Countess, he set forth with the sorceress to the palace of the sorceresses. And there he remained for 3 weeks, and then he made choice of a horse and arms, and went his way. And in the evening he entered a valley, and at the head of the valley he came to a hermit's cell, and the hermit welcomed him gladly, and there he spent the night. And in the morning he arose, and when he went forth, behold, a shower of snow had fallen the night before, and a hawk had killed a wild fowl in front of the cell. And the noise of the horse scared the hawk away, and a raven alighted upon the bird. And Pajor stood, and compared the blackness of the raven and the whiteness of the snow, and the redness of the blood, to the hair of the lady that best he loved, which was blacker than jet, and to her skin which was whiter than the snow, and to the 2 red spots upon her cheeks, which were redder than the blood upon the snow appeared to be. Now Arthur and his household were in search of Pajor. Know ye, said Arthur, who is the knight with the long spear that stands by the brook up yonder? Lord, said one of them, I will go and learn who he is. So the youth came to the place where Pajor was, and asked him what he did thus, and who he was. And from the intensity with which he thought upon the lady whom best he loved, he gave him no answer. Then the youth thrust at Pajor with his lance, and Pajor turned upon him, and struck him over his horse's crupper to the ground. And after this, 24 youths came to him, and he did not answer one more than another, but gave the same reception to all, bringing them with one single thrust to the ground. And then came Kai, and spoke to Pajor rudely and angrily, and Pajor took him with his lance under the jaw, and cast him from him with a thrust, so that he broke his arm and his shoulder blade, and he rode over him 21 times. And while he lay thus, stunned with the violence of the pain that he had suffered, his horse returned back at a wild and prancing pace. And when the household saw the horse come back without his rider, they rode forth in haste to the place where the encounter had been. And when they first came there, they thought that Kai was slain, but they found that if he had a skillful physician, he yet might live. And Pajor moved not from his meditation, on seeing the concourse that was around Kai. And Kai was brought to Arthur's tent, and Arthur caused skillful physicians to come to him. And Arthur was grieved that Kai had met with this reverse, for he loved him greatly. Then said Gwalchmai, it is not fitting that any should disturb an honorable knight from his thought unadvisedly, for either he is pondering some damage that he has sustained, or he is thinking of the lady whom best he loves. And through such ill-advised proceeding, perchance this misadventure has befallen him who last met with him. And if it seem well to thee, Lord, I will go and see if this knight hath changed from his thought, and if he has, I will ask him courteously to come and visit thee. Then Kai was wroth, and he spoke angry and spiteful words. Gwalchmai, said he, I know that thou wilt bring him because he is fatigued. Little praise and honor, nevertheless, wilt thou have from vanquishing a weary knight, who is tired with fighting. Yet thus hast thou gained the advantage over many. And while thy speech and thy soft words last, a coat of thin linen were armor sufficient for thee, and thou wilt not need to break either lance or sword in fighting with the knight in the state he is in. Then said Gwalchmai to Kai, thou mightest use more pleasant words, wert thou so minded, and it behoves thee not upon me to wreak thy wrath and thy displeasure. Methinks I shall bring the knight hither with me without breaking either my arm or my shoulder. Then said Arthur to Gwalchmai, thou speakest like a wise and prudent man, go, and take enough of armor about thee, and choose thy horse. And Gwalchmai accoutred himself and rode forward hastily to the place where Pajor was. And Pajor was resting on the shaft of his spear, pondering the same thought, and Gwalchmai came to him without any signs of hostility, and said to him, if I thought that it would be as agreeable to thee as it would be to me, I would converse with thee. I have also a message from Arthur unto thee, to pray thee to come and visit him. And 2 men have been before on this errand. That is true, said Pajor, and uncourteously they came. They attacked me, and I was annoyed thereat, for it was not pleasing to me to be drawn from the thought that I was in, for I was thinking of the lady whom best I love, and thus was she brought to my mind. I was looking upon the snow, and upon the raven, and upon the drops of the blood of the bird that the hawk had killed upon the snow. And I bethought me that her whiteness was like that of the snow, and that the blackness of her hair and her eyebrows like that of the raven, and that the 2 red spots upon her cheeks were like the 2 drops of blood. Said Gwalchmai, this was not an ungentle thought, and I should marvel if it were pleasant to thee to be drawn from it. Tell me, said Pajor, is Kai in Arthur's court? He is, said he, and behold he is the knight that fought with thee last, and it would have been better for him had he not come, for his arm and his shoulder blade were broken with the fall which he had from thy spear. Verily, said Pajor, I am not sorry to have thus begun to avenge the insult to the dwarf and dwarfess. Then Gwaltmai marveled to hear him speak of the dwarf and the dwarfess, and he approached him, and threw his arms around his neck, and asked him what was his name. Pajor the son of Everorcam I called, said he, and thou, who art thou? I am called Gwaltmai, he replied. I am right glad to meet with thee, said Pajor, for in every country where I have been I have heard of thy fame for prowess and uprightness, and I solicit thy fellowship. Thou shalt have it, by my faith, and grant me thine, said he. Gladly will I do so, answered Pajor. So they rode forth together joyfully towards the place where Arthur was, and when Kai saw them coming, he said, I knew that Gwaltmai needed not to fight the knight. And it is no wonder that he should gain fame, more can he do by his fair words than I by the strength of my arm. And Pajor went with Gwaltmai to his tent, and they took off their armor. And Pajor put on garments like those that Gwaltmai wore, and they went together unto Arthur, and saluted him. Behold, Lord, said Gwaltmai, him whom thou hast sought so long. Welcome unto thee, chieftain, said Arthur. With me thou shalt remain, and had I known thy valor had been such, thou shouldst not have left me as thou didst. Nevertheless, this was predicted of thee by the dwarf and the dwarfess, whom Kai ill-treated and whom thou hast avenged. And hereupon, behold, there came the queen and her handmaidens, and Pajor saluted them. And they were rejoiced to see him, and bade him welcome. And Arthur did him great honor and respect, and they returned towards Cerulean. And the first night Pajor came to Cerulean to Arthur's court, and as he walked in the city after his repast, behold, there met him Angharad Lawyer Orc. By my faith, sister, said Pajor, thou art a beauteous and lovely maiden, and, were it pleasing to thee, I could love thee above all women. I pledge my faith, said she, that I do not love thee, nor will I ever do so. I also pledge my faith, said Pajor, that I will never speak a word to any Christian again, until thou come to love me above all men. The next day Pajor went forth by the high road, along a mountain ridge, and he saw a valley of a circular form, the confines of which were rocky and wooded. And the flat part of the valley was in meadows, and there were fields betwixt the meadows and the wood. And in the bosom of the wood he saw large black houses of uncouth workmanship. And he dismounted, and led his horse towards the wood. And a little way within the wood he saw a rocky ledge, along which the road lay. And upon the ledge was a lion bound by a chain, and sleeping. And beneath the lion he saw a deep pit of immense size, full of the bones of men and animals. And Pajor drew his sword and struck the lion, so that he fell into the mouth of the pit and hung there by the chain, and with a second blow he struck the chain and broke it, and the lion fell into the pit, and Pajor led his horse over the rocky ledge, until he came into the valley. And in the center of the valley he saw a fair castle, and he went towards it. And in the meadow by the castle he beheld a huge grey man sitting, who was larger than any man he had ever before seen. And 2 young pages were shooting the hilts of their daggers, of the bone of the seahorse. And one of the pages had red hair, and the other auburn. And they went before him to the place where the grey man was, and Pajor saluted him. And the grey man said, Disgrace to the beard of my porter. Then Pajor understood that the porter was the lion. And the grey man and the pages went together into the castle, and Pajor accompanied them, and he found it a fair and noble place. And they proceeded to the hall, and the tables were already laid, and upon them was abundance of food and liquor. And thereupon he saw an aged woman and a young woman come from the chamber, and they were the most stately women he had ever seen. Then they washed and went to meat, and the grey man sat in the upper seat at the head of the table, and the aged woman next to him. And Pajor and the maiden were placed together, and the 2 young pages served them. And the maiden gazed sorrowfully upon Pajor, and Pajor asked the maiden wherefore she was sad. For thee, my soul, for, from when I first beheld thee, I have loved thee above all men. And it pains me to know that so gentle a youth as thou should have such a doom as awaits thee tomorrow. Sawest thou the numerous black houses in the bosom of the wood? All these belong to the vassals of the grey man yonder, who is my father. And they are all giants. And tomorrow they will rise up against thee, and will slay thee. And the round valley is this valley called. Listen, fair maiden, wilt thou contrive that my horse and arms be in the same lodging with me tonight? Gladly will I cause it so to be, by heaven, if I can. And when it was time for them to sleep rather than to carouse, they went to rest. And the maiden caused Pajor's horse and arms to be in the same lodging with him. And the next morning Pajor heard a great tumult of men and horses around the castle. And Pajor arose, and armed himself and his horse, and went to the meadow. Then the aged woman and the maiden came to the grey man. Lord, said they, take the word of the youth, that he will never disclose what he has seen in this place, and we will be his sureties that he keep it. I will not do so, by my faith, said the grey man. So Pajor fought with the host, and towards evening he had slain the 1/3 of them without receiving any hurt himself. Then said the aged woman, behold, many of thy host have been slain by the youth, do thou, therefore, grant him mercy. I will not grant it, by my faith, said he. And the aged woman and the fair maiden were upon the battlements of the castle, looking forth. And at that juncture, Pajor encountered the yellow-haired youth and slew him. Lord, said the maiden, grant the young man mercy. That will I not do, by heaven, he replied, and thereupon Pajor attacked the auburn-haired youth, and slew him likewise. It were better that thou hadst accorded mercy to the youth before he had slain thy 2 sons, for now scarcely wilt thou thyself escape from him. Go, maiden, and beseech the youth to grant mercy unto us, for we yield ourselves into his hands. So the maiden came to the place where Pajor was, and besought mercy for her father, and for all such of his vassals as had escaped alive. Thou shalt have it, on condition that thy father and all that are under him go and render homage to Arthur, and tell him that it was his vassal Pajor that did him this service. This will we do willingly, by heaven. And you shall also receive baptism, and I will send to Arthur, and beseech him to bestow this valley upon thee and upon thy heirs after thee forever. Then they went in, and the grey man and the tall woman saluted Pajor. And the grey man said unto him, since I have possessed this valley I have not seen any Christian depart with his life, save thyself. And we will go to do homage to Arthur, and to embrace the faith and be baptized. Then said Pajor, to heaven I render thanks that I have not broken my vow to the lady that best I love, which was, that I would not speak one word unto any Christian. That night they tarried there. And the next day, in the morning, the grey man, with his company, set forth to Arthur's court, and they did homage unto Arthur, and he caused them to be baptized. And the grey man told Arthur that it was Pajor that had vanquished them. And Arthur gave the valley to the grey man and his company, to hold it of him as Pajor had besought. And with Arthur's permission, the grey man went back to the round valley. Pajor rode forward next day, and he traversed a vast tract of desert, in which no dwellings were. And at length he came to a habitation, mean and small. And there he heard that there was a serpent that lay upon a gold ring, and suffered none to inhabit the country for 7 miles around. And Pajor came to the place where he heard the serpent was. And angrily, furiously, and desperately fought he with the serpent, and at last he killed it, and took away the ring. And thus he was for a long time without speaking a word to any Christian. And therefrom he lost his colour and his aspect, through extreme longing after the court of Arthur, and the society of the lady whom best he loved, and of his companions. Then he proceeded forward to Arthur's court, and on the road there met him Arthur's household going on a particular errand, with Kai at their head. And Pajor knew them all, but none of the household recognized him. Whence comest thou, chieftain, said Kai. And this he asked him 2 and 3 times, and he answered him not. And Kai thrust him through the thigh with his lance. And lest he should be compelled to speak, and to break his vow, he went on without stopping. Then said Gwalk, I declare to heaven, Kai, that thou hast acted ill in committing such an outrage on a youth like this, who cannot speak. And Gwalk returned back to Arthur's court. Lady, said he to Gwenhwyvar, seest thou how wicked an outrage Kai has committed upon this youth who cannot speak? For heaven's sake, and for mine, cause him to have medical care before I come back, and I will repay thee the charge. And before the men returned from their errand, a knight came to the meadow beside Arthur's palace, to dare someone to the encounter. And his challenge was accepted, and Pajor fought with him, and overthrew him. And for a week he overthrew one knight every day. And one day, Arthur and his household were going to church, and they beheld a knight who had raised the signal for combat. Verily, said Arthur, by the valour of men, I will not go hence until I have my horse and my arms to overthrow yonder boar. Then went the attendants to fetch Arthur's horse and arms. And Pajor met the attendants as they were going back, and he took the horse and arms from them, and proceeded to the meadow, and all those who saw him arise and go to do battle with the knight, went upon the tops of the houses, and the mounds, and the high places, to behold the combat. And Pajor beckoned with his hand to the knight to commence the fight. And the knight thrust at him, but he was not thereby moved from where he stood. And Pajor spurred his horse, and ran at him wrathfully, furiously, fiercely, desperately, and with mighty rage, and he gave him a thrust, deadly wounding, severe, furious, adroit, and strong, under his jaw, and raised him out of his saddle, and cast him a long way from him. And Pajor went back, and left the horse and the arms with the attendant as before, and he went on foot to the palace. Then Pajor went by the name of the dumb youth. And behold, Angharad Law Yorok met him. I declare to heaven, chieftain, said she, woeful is it that thou canst not speak, for couldst thou speak, I would love thee best of all men, and by my faith, although thou canst not, I do love thee above all. Heaven reward thee, my sister, said Pajor, by my faith I also do love thee. Thereupon it was known that he was Pajor. And then he held fellowship with Pwlgmai, and Owain the son of Urien, and all the household, and he remained in Arthur's court. Arthur was in Cerulean upon Usk, and he went to hunt, and Pajor went with him. And Pajor let loose his dog upon a hart, and the dog killed the hart in a desert place. And a short space from him he saw signs of a dwelling, and towards the dwelling he went, and he beheld a hall, and at the door of the hall he found bald swarthy youths playing at chess. And when he entered, he beheld 3 maidens sitting on a bench, and they were all clothed alike, as became persons of high rank. And he came, and sat by them upon the bench, and one of the maidens looked steadfastly upon Pajor, and wept. And Pajor asked her wherefore she was weeping. Through grief, that I should see so fair a youth as thou art, slain. Who will slay me, inquired Pajor. If thou art so daring as to remain here tonight, I will tell thee. How great soever my danger may be from remaining here, I will listen unto thee. This palace is owned by him who is my father, said the maiden, and he slays every one who comes hither without his leave. What sort of a man is thy father, that he is able to slay every one thus? A man who does violence and wrong unto his neighbors, and who renders justice unto none. And hereupon he saw the youths arise and clear the chessmen from the board. And he heard a great tumult, and after the tumult there came in a huge black one-eyed man, and the maidens arose to meet him. And they disarrayed him, and he went and sat down, and after he had rested and pondered a while, he looked at Pajor, and asked who the knight was. Lord, said one of the maidens, he is the fairest and gentlest youth that ever thou didst see. And for the sake of heaven, and of thine own dignity, have patience with him. For thy sake I will have patience, and I will grant him his life this night. Then Pajor came towards them to the fire, and partook of food and liquor, and entered into discourse with the ladies. And being elated with the liquor, he said to the black man, it is a marvel to me, so mighty as thou sayest thou art, who could have put out thine eye? It is one of my habits, said the black man, that whosoever puts to me the question which thou hast asked, shall not escape with his life, either as a free gift or for a price. Lord, said the maiden, whatsoever he may say to thee in jest, and through the excitement of liquor, make good that which thou saidst and didst promise me just now. I will do so, gladly, for thy sake, said he. Willingly will I grant him his life this night. And that night thus they remained. And the next day the black man got up, and put on his armor, and said to Pajor, arise, man, and suffer death. And Pajor said unto him, do one of 2 things, black man, if thou wilt fight with me, either throw off thy own armor, or give arms to me, that I may encounter thee. Ha, man, said he, couldst thou fight, if thou hadst arms? Take, then, what arms thou dost choose. And thereupon the maiden came to Pajor with such arms as pleased him, and he fought with the black man, and forced him to crave his mercy. Black man, thou shalt have mercy, provided thou tell me who thou art, and who put out thine eye. Lord, I will tell thee, I lost it in fighting with the black serpent of the Khan. There is a mound, which is called the Mound of Mourning, and on the mound there is a Khan, and in the Khan there is a serpent, and on the tail of the serpent there is a stone, and the virtues of the stone are such, that whosoever should hold it in one hand, in the other he will have as much gold as he may desire. And in fighting with this serpent was it that I lost my eye. And the black oppressor am I called. And for this reason I am called the black oppressor, that there is not a single man around me whom I have not oppressed, and justice have I done unto none. Tell me, said Pajor, how far is it hence? The same day that thou settest forth, thou wilt come to the palace of the sons of the king of the torches. Wherefore are they called thus? The Adank of the lake slays them once every day. When thou goest thence, thou wilt come to the court of the Countess of the Achievements. What achievements are there? Asked Pajor. 300 men there are in her household, and unto every stranger that comes to the court, the achievements of her household are related. And this is the manner of it, the 300 men of the household sit next unto the lady, and that not through disrespect unto the guests, but that they may relate the achievements of the household. And the day that thou goest thence, thou wilt reach the mound of mourning, and round about the mound there are the owners of 300 tents guarding the serpent. Since thou hast, indeed, been an oppressor so long, said Pajor, I will cause that thou continue so no longer. So he slew him. Then the maiden spoke, and began to converse with him. If thou wast poor when thou camest here, henceforth thou wilt be rich through the treasure of the black man whom thou hast slain. Thou seest the many lovely maidens that there are in this court, thou shalt have her whom thou best likest for the lady of thy love. Lady, I came not hither from my country to woo, but match yourselves as it liketh you with the comely youths I see here, and none of your goods do I desire, for I need them not. Then Pajor rode forward, and he came to the palace of the sons of the king of the torches, and when he entered the palace, he saw none but women, and they rose up, and were joyful at his coming, and as they began to discourse with him, he beheld a charger arrive, with a saddle upon it, and a corpse in the saddle. And one of the women arose, and took the corpse from the saddle, and anointed it in a vessel of warm water, which was below the door, and placed precious balsam upon it, and the man rose up alive, and came to the place where Pajor was, and greeted him, and was joyful to see him. And 2 other men came in upon their saddles, and the maiden treated these 2 in the same manner as she had done the first. Then Pajor asked the chieftain wherefore it was thus. And they told him, that there was an Adank in a cave, which slew them once every day. And thus they remained that night. And next morning the youths arose to sally forth, and Pajor besought them, for the sake of the ladies of their love, to permit him to go with them, but they refused him, saying, If thou shouldst be slain there, thou hast none to bring thee back to life again. And they rode forward, and Pajor followed after them, and, after they had disappeared out of his sight, he came to a mound, whereon sat the fairest lady he had ever beheld. I know thy quest, said she, thou art going to encounter the Adank, and he will slay thee, and that not by courage, but by craft. He has a cave, and at the entrance of the cave there is a stone pillar, and he sees every one that enters, and none see him, and from behind the pillar he slays every one with a poisonous dart. And if thou wouldst pledge me thy faith to love me above all women, I would give thee a stone, by which thou shouldst see him when thou goest in, and he should not see thee. I will, by my troth, said Pajor, for when first I beheld thee I loved thee, and where shall I seek thee? When thou seekest me, seek towards India. And the maiden vanished, after placing the stone in Pajor's hand. And he came towards a valley, through which ran a river, and the borders of the valley were wooded, and on each side of the river were level meadows. And on one side of the river he saw a flock of white sheep, and on the other a flock of black sheep. And whenever one of the white sheep bleated, one of the black sheep would cross over and become white, and when one of the black sheep bleated, one of the white sheep would cross over and become black. And he saw a tall tree by the side of the river, one half of which was in flames from the root to the top, and the other half was green and in full leaf. And nigh thereto he saw a youth sitting upon a mound, and 2 greyhounds, white-breasted and spotted, in leashes, lying by his side. And certain was he that he had never seen a youth of so royal a bearing as he. And in the wood opposite he heard hounds raising a herd of deer. And Pajor saluted the youth, and the youth greeted him in return. And there were 3 roads leading from the mound, 2 of them were wide roads, and the third was more narrow. And Pajor inquired where the 3 roads went. One of them goes to my palace, said the youth, and one of 2 things I counsel thee to do, either to proceed to my palace, which is before thee, and where thou wilt find my wife, or else to remain here to see the hounds chasing the roused deer from the wood to the plain. And thou shalt see the best greyhounds thou didst ever behold, and the boldest in the chase, kill them by the water beside us, and when it is time to go to meat, my page will come with my horse to meet me, and thou shalt rest in my palace tonight. Heaven reward thee, but I cannot tarry, for onward must I go. The other road leads to the town, which is near here, and wherein food and liquor may be bought, and the road which is narrower than the others goes towards the cave of the Adank. With thy permission, young man, I will go that way. And Pajor went towards the cave. And he took the stone in his left hand, and his lance in his right. And as he went in he perceived the Adank, and he pierced him through with his lance, and cut off his head. And as he came from the cave, behold the 3 companions were at the entrance, and they saluted Pajor, and told him that there was a prediction that he should slay that monster. And Pajor gave the head to the young men, and they offered him in marriage whichever of the 3 sisters he might choose, and half their kingdom with her. I came not hither to woo, said Pajor, but if peradventure I took a wife, I should prefer your sister to all others. And Pajor rode forward, and he heard a noise behind him. And he looked back, and saw a man upon a red horse, with red armor upon him, and the man rode up by his side, and saluted him, and wished him the favor of heaven and of man. And Pajor greeted the youth kindly. Lord, I come to make a request unto thee. What wouldest thou? That thou shouldest take me as thine attendant. Whom then should I take as my attendant, if I did so? I will not conceal from thee what kindred I am of. Itlim Glediv Cockham I called, an earl from the east country. I marvel that thou shouldest offer to become attendant to a man whose possessions are no greater than thine own, for I have but an earldom like thyself. But since thou desirest to be my attendant, I will take thee joyfully. And they went forward to the court of the countess, and all they of the court were glad at their coming, and they were told it was not through disrespect they were placed below the household, but that such was the usage of the court. For, whoever should overthrow the 300 men of her household, would sit next the countess, and she would love him above all men. And Pajor, having overthrown the 300 men of her household, sat down beside her, and the countess said, I thank heaven that I have a youth so fair and so valiant as thou, since I have not obtained the man whom best I love. Who is he whom best thou lovest? By my faith, Itlim Glediv Cock is the man whom I love best, and I have never seen him. Of a truth, Itlim is my companion, and behold here he is, and for his sake did I come to joust with thy household. And he could have done so better than I, had it pleased him. And I do give thee unto him. Heaven reward thee, fair youth, and I will take the man whom I love above all others. And the countess became Itlim's bride from that moment. And the next day Pajor set forth towards the mound of mourning. By thy hand, Lord, but I will go with thee, said Itlim. Then they went forwards till they came in sight of the mound and the tents. Go unto yonder men, said Pajor to Itlim, and desire them to come and do me homage. So Itlim went unto them, and said unto them thus, Come and do homage to my lord. Who is thy lord, said they. Pajor with the long lance is my lord, said Itlim. Were it permitted to slay a messenger, thou shouldest not go back to thy lord alive, for making unto kings, and earls, and barons so arrogant a demand as to go and do him homage. Pajor desired him to go back to them, and to give them their choice, either to do him homage, or to do battle with him. And they chose rather to do battle. And that day Pajor overthrew the owners of 100 tents, and the next day he overthrew the owners of 100 more, and the third day the remaining 100 took counsel to do homage to Pajor. And Pajor inquired of them, wherefore they were there. And they told him they were guarding the serpent until he should die. For then should we fight for the stone among ourselves, and whoever should be conqueror among us would have the stone. Await here, said Pajor, and I will go to encounter the serpent. Not so, Lord, said they, we will go all together to encounter the serpent. Verily, said Pajor, that will I not permit, for if the serpent be slain, I shall derive no more fame therefrom than one of you. Then he went to the place where the serpent was, and slew it, and came back to them, and said, Reckon up what you have spent since you have been here, and I will repay you to the full. And he paid to each what he said was his claim. And he required of them only that they should acknowledge themselves his vassals. And he said to Itlim, Go back unto her whom thou lovest best, and I will go forwards, and I will reward thee for having been my attendant. And he gave Itlim the stone. Heaven repay thee and prosper thee, said Itlim. And Pajor rode thence, and he came to the fairest valley he had ever seen, through which ran a river, and there he beheld many tents of various colors. And he marveled still more at the number of watermills and of windmills that he saw. And there rode up with him a tall auburn-haired man, in workman's garb, and Pajor inquired of him who he was. I am the chief miller, said he, of all the mills yonder. Wilt thou give me lodging, said Pajor. I will, gladly, he answered. And Pajor came to the miller's house, and the miller had a fair and pleasant dwelling. And Pajor asked money as a loan from the miller, that he might buy meat and liquor for himself and for the household, and he promised that he would pay him again ere he went thence. And he inquired of the miller, wherefore such a multitude was there assembled. Said the miller to Pajor, one thing is certain, either thou art a man from afar, or thou art beside thyself. The Empress of Christinople the Great is here, and she will have no one but the man who is most valiant, for riches does she not require. And it was impossible to bring food for so many thousands as are here, therefore were all these mills constructed. And that night they took their rest. And the next day Pajor arose, and he equipped himself and his horse for the tournament. And among the other tents he beheld one, which was the fairest he had ever seen. And he saw a beauteous maiden leaning her head out of a window of the tent, and he had never seen a maiden more lovely than she. And upon her was a garment of satin. And he gazed fixedly on the maiden, and began to love her greatly. And he remained there, gazing upon the maiden from morning until midday, and from midday until evening, and then the tournament was ended and he went to his lodging and drew off his armor. Then he asked money of the miller as a loan, and the miller's wife was wroth with Pajor, nevertheless, the miller lent him the money. And the next day he did in like manner as he had done the day before. And at night he came to his lodging, and took money as a loan from the miller. And the third day, as he was in the same place, gazing upon the maiden, he felt a hard blow between the neck and the shoulder, from the edge of an axe. And when he looked behind him, he saw that it was the miller, and the miller said to him, do one of two things, either turn thy head from hence, or go to the tournament. And Pajor smiled on the miller, and went to the tournament, and all that encountered him that day he overthrew. And as many as he vanquished he sent as a gift to the empress, and their horses and arms he sent as a gift to the wife of the miller, in payment of the borrowed money. Pajor attended the tournament until all were overthrown, and he sent all the men to the prison of the empress, and the horses and arms to the wife of the miller, in payment of the borrowed money. And the empress sent to the knight of the mill, to ask him to come and visit her. And Pajor went not for the first nor for the second message. And the third time she sent 100 knights to bring him against his will, and they went to him and told him their mission from the empress. And Pajor fought well with them, and caused them to be bound like stags, and thrown into the mill dike. And the empress sought advice of a wise man who was in her council, and he said to her, with thy permission, I will go to him myself. So he came to Pajor, and saluted him, and besought him, for the sake of the lady of his love, to come and visit the empress. And they went, together with the miller. And Pajor went and sat down in the outer chamber of the tent, and she came and placed herself by his side. And there was but little discourse between them. And Pajor took his leave, and went to his lodging. And the next day he came to visit her, and when he came into the tent there was no one chamber less decorated than the others. And they knew not where he would sit. And Pajor went and sat beside the empress, and discoursed with her courteously. And while they were thus, they beheld a black man enter with a goblet full of wine in his hand. And he dropped upon his knee before the empress, and besought her to give it to no one who would not fight with him for it. And she looked upon Pajor. Lady, said he, bestow on me the goblet. And Pajor drank the wine, and gave the goblet to the miller's wife. And while they were thus, behold, there entered a black man of larger stature than the other, with a wild beast's claw in his hand, wrought into the form of a goblet and filled with wine. And he presented it to the empress, and besought her to give it to no one but the man who would fight with him. Lady, said Pajor, bestow it on me. And she gave it to him. And Pajor drank the wine, and sent the goblet to the wife of the miller. And while they were thus, behold, a rough-looking, crisp-haired man, taller than either of the others, came in with a bowl in his hand full of wine, and he bent upon his knee, and gave it into the hands of the empress, and he besought her to give it to none but him who would fight with him for it, and she gave it to Pajor, and he sent it to the miller's wife. And that night Pajor returned to his lodging, and the next day he accoutred himself and his horse, and went to the meadow and slew the 3 men. Then Pajor proceeded to the tent, and the empress said to him, Goodly Pajor, remember the faith thou didst pledge me when I gave thee the stone, and thou didst kill the Adank. Lady, answered he, thou sayest truth, I do remember it. And Pajor was entertained by the empress 14 years, as the story relates. Arthur was at Cerulean upon Usk, his principal palace, and in the center of the floor of the hall were 4 men sitting on a carpet of velvet, Owain the son of Urien, and Gwalgmai the son of Gwyar, and Howel the son of Imelidor, and Pajor of the long lance. And thereupon they saw a black curly-headed maiden enter, riding upon a yellow mule, with jagged thongs in her hand to urge it on, and having a rough and hideous aspect. Blacker were her face and her 2 hands than the blackest iron covered with pitch, and her hue was not more frightful than her form. High cheeks had she, and a face lengthened downwards, and a short nose with distended nostrils. And one eye was of a piercing mottled grey, and the other was as black as jet, deep sunk in her head. And her teeth were long and yellow, more yellow were they than the flower of the broom. And her stomach rose from the breastbone, higher than her chin. And her back was in the shape of a crook, and her legs were large and bony. And her figure was very thin and spare, except her feet and her legs, which were of huge size. And she greeted Arthur and all his household except Pajor. And to Pajor she spoke harsh and angry words. Pajor, I greet thee not, seeing that thou dost not merit it. Blind was fate in giving thee fame and favor. When thou wast in the court of the lame king, and didst see there the youth bearing the streaming spear, from the points of which were drops of blood flowing in streams, even to the hand of the youth, and many other wonders likewise, thou didst not inquire their meaning nor their cause. Hadst thou done so, the king would have been restored to health, and his dominions to peace. Whereas from henceforth, he will have to endure battles and conflicts, and his knights will perish, and wives will be widowed, and maidens will be left portionless, and all this is because of thee. Then said she unto Arthur, May it please thee, Lord, my dwelling is far hence, in the stately castle of which thou hast heard, and therein are 566 knights of the order of chivalry, and the lady whom best he loves with each, and whoever would acquire fame in arms, and encounters, and conflicts, he will gain it there, if he deserve it. And whoso would reach the summit of fame and of honor, I know where he may find it. There is a castle on a lofty mountain, and there is a maiden therein, and she is detained a prisoner there, and whoever shall set her free will attain the summit of the fame of the world. And thereupon she rode away. Said Gwalchmai, by my faith, I will not rest tranquilly until I have proved if I can release the maiden. And many of Arthur's household joined themselves with him. Then, likewise, said Pajor, by my faith, I will not rest tranquilly until I know the story and the meaning of the lance whereof the black maiden spoke. And while they were equipping themselves, behold, a knight came to the gate. And he had the size and the strength of a warrior, and was equipped with arms and habiliments. And he went forward, and saluted Arthur and all his household, except Gwalchmai. And the knight had upon his shoulder a shield, ingrained with gold, with a fess of azure blue upon it, and his whole armor was of the same hue. And he said to Gwalchmai, Thou didst slay my lord by thy treachery and deceit, and that will I prove upon thee. Then Gwalchmai rose up. Behold, said he, here is my gage against thee, to maintain, either in this place or wherever else thou wilt, that I am not a traitor or deceiver. Before the king whom I obey, will I that my encounter with thee take place, said the knight. Willingly, said Gwalchmai, go forward, and I will follow thee. So the knight went forth, and Gwalchmai accoutred himself, and there was offered unto him abundance of armor, but he would take none but his own. And when Gwalchmai and Pajor were equipped, they set forth to follow him, by reason of their fellowship and of the great friendship that was between them. And they did not go after him in company together, but each went his own way. At the dawn of day Gwalchmai came to a valley, and in the valley he saw a fortress, and within the fortress a vast palace and lofty towers around it. And he beheld a knight coming out to hunt from the other side, mounted on a spirited black snorting palfrey, that advanced at a prancing pace, proudly stepping, and nimbly bounding, and sure of foot, and this was the man to whom the palace belonged. And Gwalchmai saluted him. Heaven prosper thee, chieftain, said he, and whence comest thou? I come, answered Gwalchmai, from the court of Arthur. And art thou Arthur's vassal? Yes, by my faith, said Gwalchmai. I will give thee good counsel, said the knight. I see that thou art tired and weary, go unto my palace, if it may please thee, and tarry there tonight. Willingly, Lord, said he, and heaven reward thee. Take this ring as a token to the porter, and go forward to yonder tower, and therein thou wilt find my sister. And Gwalchmai went to the gate, and showed the ring, and proceeded to the tower. And on entering he beheld a large blazing fire, burning without smoke and with a bright and lofty flame, and a beauteous and stately maiden was sitting on a chair by the fire. And the maiden was glad at his coming, and welcomed him, and advanced to meet him. And he went and sat beside the maiden, and they took their repast. And when their repast was over, they discoursed pleasantly together. And while they were thus, behold, there entered a venerable hoary-headed man. Ah, base girl, said he, if thou didst think it was right for thee to entertain and to sit by yonder man, thou wouldst not do so. And he withdrew his head, and went forth. Ah, chieftain, said the maiden, if thou wilt do as I counsel thee, thou wilt shut the door, lest the man should have a plot against thee. Upon that Gwalchmai arose, and when he came near unto the door, the man, with 60 others, fully armed, were ascending the tower. And Gwalchmai defended the door with a chessboard, that none might enter until the man should return from the chase. And thereupon, behold, the earl arrived. What is all this? Asked he. It is a sad thing, said the hoary-headed man, the young girl yonder has been sitting and eating with him who slew your father. He is Gwalchmai, the son of Gwyar. Hold thy peace, then said the earl, I will go in. And the earl was joyful concerning Gwalchmai. Ha, chieftain, said he, it was wrong of thee to come to my court, when thou knewest that thou didst slay my father, and though we cannot avenge him, heaven will avenge him upon thee. My soul, said Gwalchmai, thus it is, I came not here either to acknowledge or to deny having slain thy father, but I am on a message from Arthur, and therefore do I crave the space of a year until I shall return from my embassy, and then, upon my faith, I will come back unto this palace, and do one of two things, either acknowledge it, or deny it. And the time was granted him willingly, and he remained there that night. And the next morning he rode forth. And the story relates nothing further of Gwalchmai respecting this adventure. And Pajor rode forward. And he wandered over the whole island, seeking tidings of the Black Maiden, and he could meet with none. And he came to an unknown land, in the center of a valley, watered by a river. And as he traversed the valley he beheld a horseman coming towards him, and wearing the garments of a priest, and he besought his blessing. Wretched man, said he, thou meritest no blessing, and thou wouldest not be profited by one, seeing that thou art clad in armor on such a day as this. And what day is today? Said Pajor. Today is Good Friday, he answered. Chide me not that I knew not this, seeing that it is a year today since I journeyed forth from my country. Then he dismounted, and led his horse in his hand. And he had not proceeded far along the high road before he came to a crossroad, and the crossroad traversed a wood. And on the other side of the wood he saw an unfortified castle, which appeared to be inhabited. And at the gate of the castle there met him the priest whom he had seen before, and he asked his blessing. The blessing of heaven be unto thee, said he, it is more fitting to travel in thy present guise than as thou wast Iruhail, and this night thou shalt tarry with me. So he remained there that night. And the next day Pajor sought to go forth. Today may no one journey. Thou shalt remain with me today and tomorrow, and the day following. And I will direct thee as best I may to the
No one have fun. Why can't you have any fun? My appendix is killing me. Well, look, I love my eats, and I want them.
Omega-1 restarting. Alpha-1 genome restructuring. Confirming exon replacement. Base code 85 million. 100 million. Its speed is overwhelming. Alpha-1 to raise your central. Access confirmed. Initializing fake net. Disconnected. Activating emergency shelter. Denied. Contamination is spreading widely. Captain.
Cut off the cables manually.
Roger. Activating self-destruct bolts. Confirming. No good, nothing happened. Omega-1, they are attacking. We can't stop them. 98% of our weapons have been taken over. The autopilot system Faust has been accessed. And its phase-based logic is being rewritten. Ergo area is increasing. An internal plane is forming. Switching to space displacement mode. Alpha-1, confirming transfer of coordinate code. Coordinates input, coordinate NX128, EZ061, the main planet.
Damn. so they're planning on attacking. Engine room. Activate the emergency sealing system. Engine room. Engine. See that all civilians and passengers are safely transported to the escape shuttles. I will send a dispatch after evacuation is complete. I am evacuating the ship. All of you, evacuate now.
Evacuate the ship immediately. All passengers please board the shuttles in a calm and orderly fashion.
Your movie not done?
Well, I'm gonna save where I'm at in this game. But I'm gonna probably switch to different games. But instead of turning on whatever this is, Jack Benny Radio, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't think I can take
Well, you really make things up.
Sending me the wrong kind of thing.
Well, you're supposed to. It was a female.
What happened? Not looking like or what?
Well, I want something.
Let's drop it. Don, has Dennis come in yet? It's time for a song.
Well, no, he hasn't, Jack.
Oh, I meant to tell you, Don, Phil won't be here. It's my own fault.
Your fault? What do you mean?
Well, before we left, Phil asked me how things were in Palm Springs. I said, draw.
So what are you doing now? Are you dating or what?
By the way, Mary, where are you staying?
Well, I don't know your name, but
I have right now. I'm just gonna think of what game
Well, I'll
I'm
drop
gonna
it.
play first.
Wait a minute, I passed that corner yet.
Oh.
They can block.
I need to choose a good.
$2 million hotel there.
Oh, wow.
What?
And it's booked solid till May.
Well, I don't doubt it. You know, the demand for hotel rooms is terrific. I know a fellow who has nothing but the blueprints, and 12 people are sleeping on it. They get off already, you could start building. This place is really popular.
You know, I was amazed when I got down here this year and saw all the beautiful new places that have been built. It's getting swankier and swankier every year.
You're right, John. Well, that's good.
You're right, Don. The most important person in society comes here. Why even Winter Rockefeller and his bride were going to spend their honeymoon in Palm Springs.
Why didn't they come?
He couldn't afford it.
Mary, stop being silly. Rockefeller's got almost as much money as Crosby. Hey, that reminds me, you know, Bob Hope did a broadcast here a few weeks ago, and they made him the mayor of Palm Springs. And Jerry Colonna, the chief of police.
What did he do to you?
They broke my glasses and pushed me out in the middle of Palm Canyon Drive. But I don't care. Doesn't make any difference. Well, there's the phone. Maybe that's Dennis now. Hello?
Hello, Benny. This is Jerry Colonna, Palm Springs chief of police.
Jerry Colonna? Well, gee, Colonna, I'm glad you phoned.
Hold the wire, Inspector Benny. My duty as police chief is calling you. I see a desperate criminal walking across me on Indian Avenue. I recognize him. Jesse James.
Wait a minute, Colonna. Jesse James has been dead for 50 years.
Wonderful climate here, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, Professor Colonna, I would have phoned you, but I didn't know where you live.
Oh, I'm living at the YWCA.
YWC, isn't that just for women?
I don't ask questions. I just have fun.
Oh, for heaven's sake, Colonna, what'd you really call me for?
Well, I hate to tell you this, Benny, but I had to go arrest Dennis Day this afternoon.
Dennis arrested? Why?
He's been in town 3 days and he hasn't paid for the air he's breathing.
But Colonna, there's no charge for fresh air.
It's your first trip to Palm Springs, bud?
Look, would you let me speak to the kid, please?
Okay. Hey, Dennis, your boss wants you on the telephone. You, Mr. Corona, can I talk? Yes, don't breathe. All right. Hello, Mr. Benny.
Oh, hello, Dennis. Don't worry about anything, kid. They can't charge you for the air you breathe. Colonna's nuts.
Not as nutty as I am. I paid him $200.
Well, that's the silliest thing I ever heard in all my 39 years.
How many years?
39.
What's the matter? You crazy or something?
What?
What's the matter? You crazy or something?
No, wait a minute. Dennis, that wasn't Colonna. That was you all the time. Why did you pull a trick like that?
Oh, I just thought I'd have a little fun. Would you like to get around the corner now?
No, and get over it.
All right, old fellow, if I can break away from beneath.
Now cut that out! And get over here immediately. You have to sing.
All right, just a second. I want to say goodbye to my friends. Goodbye, Ronnie. Bye, old fellow. Nice of you to drop in. Goodbye, Colonna. Better go, Gabe. Don't be late.
Yeah, give my regards and come over.
Who was it, Dad?
The Andrews sisters. Say, John, it'll be a few minutes before Dennis gets here, so how about having the quartet do a commercial now?
Okay, Jack, I got the portion right here, and the number they prepared is very appropriate for Palm Springs. It's called My Adobe Hacienda.
Good. Well, but have to sing it straight, John. I don't like it when they undersell it.
I've heard it, Jack, and they sing it beautifully.
All right, but fellas, remember, I want you to sing it straight all the way through. You promise? Thanks. Thank you.
I see. I see. I see. I see.
Boy, now look, hold it a minute, hold it. John, there's no commercial in it. Where is it?
It's coming. Go ahead, boy.
Everybody's smoking That's right. You bet. Every time you know where that find the pack of gold, you say it's nothing to do one, 2, 3. In my
Fancy glasses.
That's enough,
That's
boy.
actually
Fellas, that's enough. All I want is a commercial.
You talking to me?
John, they promised me. Fellas, look, I don't want it. Wait a minute, boy. Look, wait a minute, something. I don't want it.
I've been your host, Servers of Action St. Smalls. Joining us with Agent Special K and another co-host. Catch you guys on the flip side.
John. San Jacinto, boy.
Oh, you're playing today?
Great. How can you do this?
I put it on the end screen and now I'm going to play Epic.
Oh, boy.
Oh, that way you're talking
Epic
to.
music.
I mean, you can't talk.
But I don't want to do it there.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
There, you see? What did it get you?
A taste for tonight. I think.
Well, that's pretty good, you ad-libbing little fool.